Hello everyone, I'm Mr. Night Story, and welcome to tonight's journey toward peaceful sleep. If you're enjoying this content, I would be so grateful if you could take a moment to like this video. I'd also love to hear from you. Please feel free to share in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Your kind support truly helps me continue creating these relaxing experiences for you. Now, please make yourself comfortable as we gently begin tonight's journey to restful sleep. The decision to escape civilization came after 3 months of relentless deadlines and the suffocating buzz of constant notifications. I packed my truck on a Friday evening in late September 2024, determined to find absolute solitude somewhere in the remote valleys of the Cascade foothills. At 32, I had spent too many years glued to screens, and my body craved the kind of silence that only exists miles from any cell tower. The drive took longer than anticipated. Winding mountain roads stretched endlessly before me, each turn revealing another identical ridge of Douglas firs. By 4 in the afternoon, I realized I had miscalculated both the distance and the rapidly shortening daylight hours. The sun hung lower than expected, casting long shadows that seemed to reach across the asphalt like grasping fingers. My truck's engine labored up the steepest grades, and I found myself checking the fuel gauge with increasing frequency. The radio had died to static hours ago, leaving only the sound of tires on pavement and the occasional creak of the vehicle's frame as it navigated the rough patches. I passed the last gas station 30 miles back, a weathered building with pumps that looked like they belonged in another decade. The temperature dropped noticeably as I gained elevation. Through the windshield, I watched patches of early frost glisten on the roadside vegetation. The air smelled different up here, cleaner but somehow thinner, carrying scents of pine sap and decomposing leaves. I cracked the window slightly, letting the mountain air fill the cab, but the chill made me roll it back up within minutes. As the afternoon wore on, I began to question the wisdom of venturing so deep into unfamiliar territory without a concrete camping plan. The original idea had been to find the established campground, but every sign I passed pointed to facilities that were closed for the season or required reservations I had not made. The nearest town was now 40 miles behind me, and turning back would mean driving these treacherous curves in complete darkness. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as I navigated another hairpin turn. The road seemed to narrow with each mile, and I had not seen another vehicle for over an hour. The isolation I had craved was becoming more absolute than I had bargained for, and a growing knot of unease settled in my stomach. The sun was painting the sky in shades of amber and crimson when I encountered another human being for the first time in hours. I had pulled over at a scenic overlook to check my map and consider my dwindling options when footsteps on gravel announced his approach. He emerged from the tree line as if he had been waiting there, a man perhaps in his 50s, with weathered skin and clothes that suggested he spent considerable time outdoors. His greeting was friendly enough, asking if I was looking for a place to spend the night. When I explained my predicament, he nodded knowingly and pointed toward a barely visible trail that disappeared into the dense forest below us. He described a hidden camping spot near a river, accessible by vehicle but invisible to casual passers-by. The way he spoke about it, with an almost proprietary familiarity, suggested he had used this location many times before. Something in his demeanor struck me as odd, though I could not articulate exactly what troubled me. Perhaps it was the way his eyes never quite met mine, or how he seemed to know immediately that I was alone and unprepared. He offered to show me the way, and despite a nagging sense of caution, I agreed. The alternative was spending the night in my truck beside the main road, and his knowledge of the area seemed genuine. The man climbed into his own vehicle, an ancient pickup truck that started with a grinding protest, and motioned for me to follow. We descended a dirt road that I would never have noticed on my own, so well was it concealed by overhanging branches and strategic placement of fallen logs. The path twisted through dense undergrowth that scraped against my truck's sides, leaving scratches I would discover later. As we drove deeper into the forest, the canopy overhead thickened until only fragments of sky remained visible. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees, and moisture began to condense on my windshield. I had to turn on my headlights despite the early hour, their beams illuminating a tunnel of vegetation that seemed to close behind us as we passed. My guide's taillights provided the only reference points in the growing gloom. Several times I lost sight of them around sharp bends, panic rising in my throat until they reappeared ahead. The road descended steadily, and I could hear the sound of rushing water growing louder through the trees. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 20 minutes, we emerged into a small clearing beside a fast-moving stream. The camping spot was indeed hidden, tucked away behind a screen of willows and wild blackberry bushes. Someone had built a fire ring from river stones, and the ground showed evidence of previous campers. My guide pointed out the best spot to park, mentioned that I would likely have complete privacy, and departed as abruptly as he had appeared, his truck disappearing back up the overgrown trail. Alone in the clearing, I took stock of my surroundings as the last daylight faded from the sky. The river ran perhaps 50 feet from where I planned to park, its constant murmur masking other sounds that might have reached my ears. The fire ring sat in the center of the clearing, surrounded by smooth stones that gleamed wetly in my headlight beams. Evidence of previous campers was everywhere. Flattened areas where tents had been pitched, beer bottles buried in the soft earth, and char marks on nearby trees. The isolation was more complete than I had anticipated. Standing beside my truck, I could not see any trace of the road we had followed, and the forest seemed to press in from all sides like a living wall. The trees were massive here, old-growth firs and cedars that towered overhead and blocked out most of the night sky. Their branches creaked in the wind with sounds like old houses settling, and occasionally something would crash through the underbrush in the distance. I set about making camp with methodical efficiency, partly to stay warm and partly to quiet the growing unease in my mind. Building a fire became my first priority, both for warmth and for the psychological comfort of light. The kindling caught easily, and soon flames were dancing in the stone circle, casting flickering shadows that made the surrounding trees seem to sway and move. The warmth felt good against my face, but it also created a sphere of light that made everything beyond its reach appear darker by contrast. I arranged a camp chair beside the fire and opened a beer, trying to recapture the sense of peaceful solitude I had sought. The alcohol helped calm my nerves, but it also made me acutely aware of every sound from the darkness beyond my small circle of light. Without cell phone service, I had brought a portable speaker and downloaded several comedy podcasts to keep me company. The familiar voices and laughter helped fill the oppressive silence, though I kept the volume lower than I would have at home. Something about broadcasting my presence into the surrounding forest felt wrong, like sending an invitation to whatever might be listening in the darkness. As the fire burned down to glowing coals, I faced the decision of whether to set up my tent or sleep in the truck. The idea of wrestling with tent poles and stakes in the dark, surrounded by unknown terrain, seemed more daunting than it had in daylight. The truck bed, with its camper shell, offered immediate shelter and the psychological security of metal walls and locking doors. I arranged my sleeping bag and gear in the truck bed, creating a makeshift bedroom that was cramped but serviceable. Through the camper shell's windows, I could see the dying fire and the edge of the forest beyond. The glass felt thin and fragile, but it was better than canvas, and I told myself that any large animal would make enough noise to wake me before it got too close. The night sounds began shortly after I settled into my sleeping bag. What had seemed like peaceful forest ambience during the day transformed into something far more unsettling in complete darkness. Every snap of a branch, every rustle of leaves, every splash from the nearby river seemed amplified and potentially threatening. The comedy podcast continued playing softly, but the laughter began to feel inappropriate and intrusive in the wilderness setting. Through the truck's windows, I could see the fire's orange glow gradually dimming to deep red coals. The circle of light it provided grew smaller with each passing hour, and the darkness beyond seemed to press closer. Several times I thought I saw movement at the edge of the light, but when I focused on the spot, nothing was there. My imagination began to populate the shadows with threats that logic told me were unlikely, but fear insisted might be real. The sleeping bag was warm enough, but the truck bed was unforgiving against my spine and shoulders. Every time I shifted position, the metal floor transmitted the sound through the vehicle's frame, making me acutely aware of how much noise I was generating. The podcast helped mask some of the external sounds, but it also prevented me from hearing what might be approaching from outside. Around midnight, something large moved through the brush on the far side of the clearing. The sound was deliberate and sustained, not the quick scurrying of a small animal, but the steady progress of something substantial. I lay perfectly still, holding my breath and straining to listen over the podcast's audio. The movement seemed to circle the camp at a distance, never coming close enough to the dying fire for me to see what was causing it. My hand found the bear spray I had placed beside my sleeping bag, and I gripped it tightly while trying to convince myself that whatever was out there was probably just a deer or elk coming to drink from the river. The rational part of my mind knew that most large animals would avoid a human camp, especially one with the lingering scent of fire and food. But the primitive part of my brain, the part evolved from prey animals, screamed warnings that I could not entirely dismiss. The sounds eventually faded, but they left me wide awake and hypersensitive to every whisper of wind through the trees. I found myself holding my breath for long periods, listening for the return of footsteps or the snap of branches that might indicate something was still nearby. The podcast became an annoyance rather than a comfort, its cheerful banter a jarring contrast to my growing anxiety. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by dreams of being watched and stalked. In one particularly vivid nightmare, I was lying in the truck bed while something pressed its face against the windows, breathing heavily and leaving condensation on the glass. I woke with a start, heart hammering, and immediately checked all the windows for signs of the dream intruder. Finding nothing, I told myself it was just anxiety manifesting in my subconscious. But the feeling of being observed persisted until dawn. The first light of morning brought a false sense of security that lasted exactly as long as it took me to climb out of the truck and survey my surroundings. The fire had died completely, leaving only cold ashes and blackened stones. The forest looked different in daylight, less threatening but somehow more alien, as if I were seeing it clearly for the first time. Moisture hung in the air, creating a thin mist that made distant objects appear to shimmer and shift. I set about rekindling the fire, more for the comfort of the ritual than for warmth. The morning was crisp, but not uncomfortable, and I looked forward to a hot breakfast and coffee before beginning the journey home. The plan was simple: eat, pack up, and leave this place with its unsettling atmosphere behind me. I had gotten the solitude I sought, perhaps more than I had bargained for, and now I craved the safety and predictability of civilization. The kindling caught easily, and soon flames were dancing again in the stone circle. I arranged my camping chair beside the fire and began preparing a simple meal of instant oatmeal and coffee. The familiar routine helped calm my nerves, and I began to feel foolish about the previous night's anxiety. Daylight had a way of making nighttime fears seem overblown and irrational. It was while I was stirring the oatmeal that I first noticed the figure at the edge of the clearing. He stood just inside the tree line, perhaps 30 yards away, partially obscured by the morning mist and the shadows of the forest. At first glance, I thought he might be another camper who had emerged from a tent I had somehow missed in the darkness. But as my eyes adjusted and focused, the details became increasingly disturbing. The man was tall and gaunt, dressed in layers of clothing that appeared to have been accumulated over months or years without laundering. But it was not his disheveled appearance that made my blood freeze in my veins. It was the hundreds of plastic bags tied to his body like grotesque ornaments. Grocery bags, shopping bags, trash bags, all knotted around his arms, legs, and torso until he resembled some nightmarish scarecrow that had wandered away from its post. The bags moved constantly in the slight breeze, creating a soft rustling sound that was barely audible over the river's murmur, but somehow carried clearly across the clearing. They were tied with such precision and abundance that his human form was almost completely obscured, creating a silhouette that belonged in a fever dream rather than a peaceful morning campsite. He stood perfectly still, facing in my general direction but not looking directly at me. His posture suggested awareness of my presence, but there was something fundamentally wrong about his behavior. No greeting, no acknowledgement, No explanation for his bizarre appearance or his presence in this remote location. He simply stood there like a monument to madness, the plastic bags whispering their secrets to the morning air. My appetite vanished instantly, replaced by a cold dread that settled in my stomach like a stone. Every instinct screamed that this encounter was not going to end with a friendly exchange of camping stories. The man's very presence felt like a violation of the natural order, as if something that should have remained hidden in the deepest parts of the forest had chosen to reveal itself in the growing daylight. Minutes passed in tense silence as we regarded each other across the clearing. I remained seated beside my fire, spoon halfway to my mouth with cooling oatmeal, while he maintained his motionless vigil at the forest's edge. The plastic bags continued their constant rustling, a sound that began to feel like whispered threats in a language I could not understand, but somehow knew was malevolent. My mind raced through possible explanations for his appearance and behavior. Perhaps he was mentally ill, a homeless individual who had wandered into the wilderness and constructed this bizarre costume from discarded materials. Maybe he was under the influence of drugs that had distorted his perception of reality. Or possibly he was playing some elaborate prank, though the remoteness of the location made that seem unlikely. None of these rational explanations adequately addressed the pure wrongness of his presence. There was something fundamentally disturbing about the way he held himself, the deliberate positioning of his body, and the calculated nature of his stillness. This was not random behavior or the actions of someone who was simply lost or confused. This felt purposeful and predatory. I forced myself to take a sip of coffee, trying to project an air of calm I did not feel. The hot liquid burned my tongue, but the pain helped focus my attention and prevent panic from overwhelming my judgment. I needed to handle this situation carefully, without escalating whatever was happening into something more dangerous. "Good morning," I called out, keeping my voice steady and friendly, despite the fear that was coursing through my system. "Beautiful day for camping, isn't it?" No response. He remained frozen in place, though I thought I detected a slight tilting of his head, as if he were listening to something I could not hear. The bags rustled more vigorously for a moment, then settled back into their previous rhythm. I tried a different approach. "Are you hungry? I've got plenty of food if you'd like to join me for breakfast." Again, no verbal response, but this time he shifted his weight slightly, causing the entire collection of bags to sway and dance. The movement was hypnotic and deeply unsettling, like watching seaweed move in underwater currents. I found myself staring at the constantly shifting patterns, trying to discern the human form beneath the plastic camouflage. The silence stretched between us, growing more oppressive with each passing second. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, could feel sweat beginning to form on my palms despite the cool morning air. Every survival instinct I possessed was screaming warnings, telling me to run, to fight, to do anything except continue this surreal standoff. "Look," I said, standing up slowly and keeping my hands visible. "I don't know what you want, but I'm just here camping. I'm not looking for any trouble." For the first time, he moved. Not toward me or away, but in a slow, deliberate circle around the perimeter of the clearing. His movements were fluid and purposeful, like a predator testing the boundaries of its territory. The bags created a constant susurration that seemed to grow louder as he moved, until it became the dominant sound in the morning air. My hand moved instinctively to the bear spray clipped to my belt. The weight of it was reassuring, but I knew that using it would escalate the situation beyond any hope of peaceful resolution. Still, the presence of some form of defense helped keep the rising panic at bay. The stranger's circling behavior continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. He moved with the patience of something that had no concept of time, no urgent need to be anywhere else or do anything else. His entire existence seemed focused on this moment, this place, and whatever purpose had brought him to my campsite on this particular morning. I tried one more time to establish communication, calling out an offer of coffee or food, but my voice sounded thin and desperate in the morning air. The lack of any human response was perhaps more terrifying than an aggressive action would have been. At least aggression was a behavior I could understand and react to. This calculated indifference was completely outside my experience. My fear finally crystallized into anger, a hot surge of emotion that cut through the paralysis of uncertainty. I was tired of being toyed with, tired of feeling like prey being evaluated by a predator. If he wanted confrontation, I would give it to him on my terms. "Acknowledge me or get out," I shouted, my voice cracking with a mixture of fear and rage. "I'm not playing whatever game this is." I pulled the bear spray from my belt and held it up where he could see it clearly, hoping the threat of pain would break through whatever mental fog was driving his behavior. The canister felt solid and purposeful in my hand, a tangible reminder that I was not completely helpless in this situation. The effect was immediate and dramatic. He stopped his circling motion and turned to face me directly for the first time since his appearance. Even with the bags obscuring his features, I could sense his attention focusing on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. For a long moment, we stared at each other across the clearing, predator and prey locked in a moment of mutual recognition. Then, without warning or explanation, he turned and walked back into the forest with the same deliberate pace he had maintained throughout the encounter. The bags rustled and whispered as he moved, the sound gradually fading as the trees swallowed his bizarre silhouette. Within seconds, he had vanished as completely as if he had never existed. I stood frozen beside my dying fire, bear spray still raised, waiting for him to reappear or for some other shoe to drop. The morning sounds of the forest gradually returned. Bird calls, wind through the trees, the constant murmur of the river. But underneath these normal sounds, I imagined I could still hear the whisper of plastic bags moving through the underbrush. The spell broke suddenly, and I snapped into frantic action. Breakfast forgotten, fire abandoned, I began throwing my gear into the truck with desperate efficiency. Every second he was out of sight was a second he could be positioning himself for another approach, possibly from a direction where I would not see him coming. The truck started on the first try, and I had never been more grateful for the sound of an internal combustion engine. I reversed quickly from the camping spot, tires spinning on the soft ground, and headed up the overgrown trail that had brought me to this nightmare location. Branches scraped against the truck's sides, but I did not slow down until I reached the main road. The drive back to civilization was a blur of adrenaline and relief. I did not stop until I reached the first town with cell phone service, where I sat in a McDonald's parking lot for an hour, trying to process what had happened in that hidden valley. The normalcy of suburban life, with its traffic lights and chain restaurants and ordinary people going about their daily routines, felt like a different universe from the one I had just escaped. Part of me wanted to report the incident to local authorities, but what would I tell them? That I had encountered a man covered in plastic bags who had stood still and watched me eat breakfast? No crime had been committed, no direct threat had been made. By any objective measure, nothing had actually happened except an unusual encounter in the wilderness, but I knew that something significant had occurred in that clearing, something that challenged my understanding of normal human behavior and the safety of solitude. The memory of those rustling bags and that calculating stillness would not fade, no matter how many miles I put between myself and that place. In the weeks that followed, I found myself researching missing persons cases in the area, looking for reports of other campers who might have encountered the same individual. I scoured online forums and social media groups dedicated to outdoor activities, searching for stories that might corroborate my experience. I found nothing concrete, but there were enough vague references to strange encounters and weird people in the woods to convince me that I was not the only one who had stumbled into something unsettling. The experience changed my relationship with solitude and wilderness camping. The peace and restoration I had sought in that remote valley had been replaced by a constant awareness of vulnerability and the thin veneer of civilization that protects us from the truly aberrant elements of human society. Every camping trip since has been to established campgrounds with other people nearby, and I no longer venture into truly remote areas alone. Sometimes in quiet moments, I wonder about the stranger with the plastic bags. Was he a local character, well known to residents but invisible to casual visitors? Was he dangerous, or simply eccentric in a way that triggered primal fears? Had he been camping in that valley for days or weeks before my arrival, watching other visitors with the same unsettling intensity? The questions multiply without answers, but one certainty remains. I was wise to trust my instincts and leave when I did. Whatever his intentions might have been, whatever purpose drove him to adorn himself with those whispering plastic ornaments and lurk in the forest shadows, I did not want to discover it through direct experience. The memory serves as a reminder that true wilderness contains more than just natural dangers. Sometimes the most frightening predators are the ones that walk upright and should know better, the ones that have abandoned the social contracts that allow civilization to function. In seeking to escape the pressures of modern life, I had stumbled into something far more primitive and threatening. I still seek solitude in nature, but I do so with greater wisdom and preparation now. The mountains and forests offer restoration and peace, but they also harbor secrets that are better left undisturbed. Some valleys should remain hidden, some clearings should stay empty, and some encounters should never happen at all. The plastic bags still rustle in my nightmares, and I suspect they always will. It was already late afternoon when I reached that secluded valley, having spent the better part of the day hiking away from civilization. After months of deadlines, endless emails, and the constant digital buzz that had consumed my existence, the profound quiet of the wilderness felt like a form of therapy. My phone displayed no service, exactly what I had been hoping for when I planned this trip. The landscape stretched before me, rolling hills blanketed with pine and oak, the occasional bird call piercing the stillness. My original plan had been straightforward: locate a suitable campsite before sunset, set up my equipment, and spend the evening basking in the solitude I had craved for so long. However, I had underestimated the hiking time required to reach this remote location. The sun was descending rapidly, casting long shadows across the trail as its orange glow filtered through the canopy above. I paused to catch my breath and check my bearings when movement caught my eye. A figure materialized on the path ahead, a man appearing to be in his 60s with weathered skin that spoke of years spent outdoors. He approached with a casual demeanor that seemed oddly out of place in such isolation. "Looking for a spot to camp?" he asked, his voice carrying easily in the still air. I nodded, trying to mask my surprise at encountering anyone this far from established trails. "James," he said simply, extending a calloused hand. "Adam," I replied, the false name slipping from my lips instinctively. Something about this encounter made me hesitant to share personal details. James gestured down a barely visible side path. "There's a perfect clearing about half a mile that way. Close enough to the access road if you need to leave quickly, but hidden enough that day hikers won't disturb you." His specific mention of quick departures raised questions, but the rapidly fading daylight outweighed my caution. I nodded my thanks and allowed him to lead the way. As we moved deeper into the undergrowth, the vegetation seemed to close ranks behind us, obscuring any trace of our passage. Several times I glanced back, seeking reassurance that the main trail remained accessible, but saw only an impenetrable wall of foliage and deepening shadows. James moved with surprising agility for his age, navigating the hidden path with the familiarity of someone who had traversed it countless times. Finally, he stopped at a small clearing beside a gently flowing river. A stone-ringed fire pit occupied the center of the space, its well-used appearance suggesting frequent occupation despite the apparent seclusion. "Perfect spot for your truck," James indicated an area just large enough for my vehicle. "River provides fresh water, trees block the wind, and nobody will bother you here." He emphasized the last point with an intensity that momentarily unsettled me. "I appreciate the help," I said, surveying the site. "Do many people camp around here?" "Not really," he replied, already backing away. "You'll have the place to yourself." Before I could ask any further questions, he disappeared into the thickening twilight, leaving me alone in the rapidly darkening clearing. The onset of dusk accelerated after James's departure. The sky transitioned through shades of crimson and violet, stars beginning to pierce the darkening canvas above. I hurried to establish my campsite, gathering fallen branches and kindling to build a fire before complete darkness enveloped the clearing. Flames soon licked upward, casting dancing shadows across the surrounding trees and providing welcome warmth against the evening's growing chill. I positioned my camp chair, retrieved a beer from my cooler, and attempted to check my phone out of habit, only to be reminded of my digital isolation. I laughed at myself, relishing the forced disconnection. In lieu of social media or news updates, I activated a downloaded podcast, a comedy show featuring friends bantering about everyday absurdities. Their laughter echoed through the trees, providing companionship in the overwhelming solitude. The fire crackled and popped as I fed it additional fuel, watching embers spiral upward toward the star-filled sky. Despite being alone in this remote location, I felt an unexpected comfort in the isolation. No deadlines, no expectations, no constant notifications demanding attention. Just the elemental simplicity of fire, water, and wilderness. As night fully claimed the forest, the shadows beyond my fire's reach grew impenetrable. Occasionally, small sounds emerged from the darkness. Twigs snapping, leaves rustling, normal forest noises that nonetheless heightened my awareness of being alone. The comedy voices from my speaker seemed increasingly out of place in this primal setting, yet I maintained the volume, perhaps subconsciously creating a barrier against the enveloping silence. Time slipped away as I sat mesmerized by the flames. When I finally checked my watch, I was surprised to discover midnight had passed. Fatigue washed over me, the day's hike finally catching up with my body. The thought of erecting my tent in near darkness held little appeal, especially with my truck offering a ready-made sleeping quarters. I decided to forego the tent and instead arranged my sleeping bag in the back of my vehicle beneath the protective shell of the topper. I organized my gear, placing essentials within easy reach. My flashlight, knife, and bear spray occupied prominent positions beside my makeshift bed, standard precautions for wilderness camping, though they provided psychological comfort beyond their practical utility. The fire had diminished to glowing embers as I closed the truck's rear door and settled into my sleeping bag. Through the windows, I observed the transformed landscape. Trees reduced to looming silhouettes, undergrowth transformed into amorphous shapes that seemed to shift and move in the emberlight. Despite my exhaustion, sleep remained elusive. The forest had grown unusually quiet, the typical nocturnal symphony conspicuously absent. Even the river's flow seemed muted, as though the entire environment were collectively holding its breath. I attributed this perception to my urban accustomed senses, yet could not entirely dismiss a growing disquiet. Every minor sound outside the truck's confines commanded immediate attention, a branch breaking under some animal's weight, the wind disturbing dried leaves, pebbles shifting near the riverbank. I frequently raised myself to peer through the windows, searching for the source of these disturbances, but encountered only darkness interrupted by vague, indistinct forms. Eventually, fatigue overwhelmed vigilance. As consciousness faded, a final thought surfaced. I wondered if anyone or anything beyond the clearing might be listening to the laughter still emanating from my speakers. The possibility sent an involuntary tremor through my body before sleep finally claimed me. Sleep came in fragmented bursts, interrupted by half-conscious moments of alertness. During one such interval, I became acutely aware of a sound different from the natural forest ambience, rhythmic, almost deliberate. My eyes snapped open, heart rate accelerating as I strained to identify the noise. It resembled footsteps, methodical and unhurried, circling the perimeter of my campsite. I lay motionless, breath suspended, listening intently. The steps continued their measured circuit, occasionally pausing before resuming their circular path. I reached silently for my flashlight but hesitated before activating it. If someone was indeed outside, announcing my wakefulness might prove unwise. Instead, I carefully shifted position to peer through the truck's rear window. The campfire had been reduced to a few glowing embers, providing minimal illumination. The forest beyond appeared as a wall of absolute darkness, occasional shapes seeming to move within it. Yet whether these movements represented actual presence or merely the product of my increasingly anxious imagination remained unclear. The footsteps stopped directly behind my truck. I heard what sounded like heavy breathing, then a subtle scratching against the vehicle's exterior. My fingers closed around the bear spray, thumb poised over the trigger mechanism. The scratching continued, moving methodically along the truck's side toward the driver's door. Then abruptly, silence descended. I waited, muscles tense, for any indication of continued presence. Minutes passed without further sound. Eventually, exhaustion reclaimed me, though my sleep remained vigilant and shallow. Dreams invaded this half-conscious state, disjointed images of being pursued through endless forest by an unseen presence. In one particularly vivid sequence, I found myself unable to move as a figure composed entirely of darkness approached my immobilized form. I awoke with a strangled gasp, disoriented and drenched in perspiration despite the night's chill. Dawn was still hours away, according to my watch. The campsite remained cloaked in darkness, though the moon had risen, casting feeble silver light across the clearing. I considered starting the truck and departing immediately, but rationality eventually prevailed. Navigating unfamiliar forest roads in darkness presented substantial risks. Better to wait for daylight. I positioned myself upright, back against the rear of the cab, determined to remain awake until morning. My eyes continuously scanned the boundaries of the clearing, searching for any anomalous movement. Occasionally, I detected what appeared to be shifting shadows among the trees, though these observations might merely have been fatigue-induced hallucinations. As the night progressed, an oppressive sensation developed, the distinct impression of being observed. It emanated not from any specific direction but seemed omnipresent, as though the entire forest had developed consciousness and focused its collective attention upon my presence. I found myself repeatedly checking the truck's locks, irrationally fearful that they might have disengaged themselves. The podcast had long since ended, leaving only natural sounds: the river's constant murmur, wind through branches, occasional rustling from the underbrush. These ordinary noises now seemed imbued with malevolent intent, each potentially signaling approach rather than random forest activity. The first hint of dawn arrived as a subtle lightening along the eastern horizon, visible through gaps in the forest canopy. I greeted this initial indication of morning with profound relief. The night's terrors, whether real or imagined, would soon be dispelled by daylight's clarifying presence. I remained vigilant as darkness gradually receded, revealing the campsite in progressively greater detail. The fire pit contained only cold ash, my camp chair stood empty beside it, and the surrounding trees appeared entirely ordinary in the strengthening light. No evidence remained of nocturnal visitors, no footprints in the soft earth beyond my own, no disturbance to my equipment beyond what I had created. Rational thought began reasserting itself. The strange sounds, the sensation of being watched, the apparent circling of my truck, all could be attributed to normal forest activity combined with isolation-induced anxiety. A raccoon investigating my campsite, perhaps, or a deer passing nearby. My urban-conditioned mind had simply interpreted these mundane occurrences through a lens of unfamiliarity and darkness-enhanced fear. As the sun finally crested the eastern ridge, I emerged from the truck, muscles protesting after hours of tension and restricted movement. The morning air carried a sharp chill that immediately cleared the remaining cobwebs of fatigue. I stretched thoroughly, then set about rekindling the fire, focusing on this practical task as further evidence of returning normalcy. Flames soon danced among fresh kindling, their warmth a welcome counterpoint to the morning's brisk temperature. I positioned the coffee pot at the fire's edge and began preparing a simple breakfast, deliberately immersing myself in these routine activities. The psychological strategy proved effective. With each ordinary action, the night's unsettling experiences receded further into improbability. I had just settled into my camp chair, steaming coffee mug in hand, when movement at the clearing's edge caught my attention. Initially, I assumed it must be wildlife, a deer perhaps, drawn by curiosity or the scent of food. However, as my vision focused, I realized with sudden clarity that the figure emerging from the tree line was unmistakably human. The individual stood approximately 6 feet tall, though precise height assessment proved difficult due to their unusual appearance. Layers of ragged clothing concealed any distinguishing physical characteristics, while their extremities and torso were festooned with what appeared to be dozens of plastic grocery bags. These fluttered slightly in the morning breeze, creating a continuous rustling sound that immediately triggered recognition, identical to the scratching noise I had heard against my truck during the night. The figure remained partially obscured by foliage, neither fully entering the clearing nor retreating into the forest. Their stance communicated indecision, occasionally shifting weight from one foot to another, but maintaining position at the perimeter. Most disturbing was their orientation, consistently angled such that their face remained hidden from my view. "Good morning," I called, striving for casual friendliness despite escalating concern. No response followed. The figure continued their peculiar shifting, plastic bags rustling with each subtle movement. The sound, innocuous in normal circumstances, now seemed profoundly unsettling in this context. "Would you like some coffee?" I offered, desperate to establish some semblance of normal human interaction. Still no acknowledgement. The figure instead began a strange lateral movement, maintaining distance while traversing the clearing's boundary. This sidelong progression, combined with their continued refusal to face me directly, intensified my growing unease. My hand moved deliberately toward the bear spray positioned beside my chair. "Do you need help?" I asked, voice noticeably tenser. The figure paused momentarily before resuming their circuit of the clearing. Their behavior defied rational explanation, neither threatening nor benign, but existing in some disturbing middle ground that prevented clear response. I found myself calculating distance to my truck's driver door, mentally cataloging accessible weapons, evaluating escape routes. "I'm going to need you to say something," I stated firmly, standing to emphasize the declaration. The plastic-adorned figure stopped moving entirely. For several excruciating seconds, absolute stillness prevailed, broken only by the fire's continued crackling and the river's distant murmur. Then, with mechanical precision, they rotated slightly further away from me, ensuring continued concealment of their face. Frustration suddenly overwhelmed caution. "Either acknowledge me or leave," I shouted, voice cracking with the strain of accumulated fear and sleeplessness. My outburst produced immediate effect. The figure's posture changed subtly, a slumping of shoulders, a slight forward inclination of the upper body. Without warning or transition, they began walking directly away from the clearing, plastic bags rustling with each deliberate step. Within moments, the dense undergrowth had swallowed them completely, leaving no evidence of their bizarre visitation. I remained frozen in place for several heartbeats after the figure's disappearance, muscles locked in anticipation of possible return. When it became apparent they had truly departed, adrenaline-fueled urgency replaced paralysis. My previous plan for a leisurely morning evaporated instantly, replaced by singular focus on immediate escape. I extinguished the fire with river water, the hissing steam barely registering as I simultaneously gathered scattered equipment. Organization gave way to expediency. Items were thrown haphazardly into the truck, with no consideration beyond speed. Throughout this frantic activity, I continuously scanned the tree line, half expecting the plastic-adorned figure to emerge from any direction. The coffee pot was abandoned, breakfast left uneaten. Within minutes, I had secured my essential gear and slid behind the steering wheel. The engine roared to life with the first attempt, its mechanical sound reassuringly normal amid the morning's surreal events. Gravel sprayed as I accelerated away from the clearing, tires briefly struggling for purchase on the uneven ground. The narrow access path James had shown me yesterday now seemed impossibly constricted, branches scratching the truck's sides as I navigated its serpentine course. Each curve obscured what lay ahead, creating a succession of blind corners that demanded reduced speed despite my desperation for rapid departure. My knuckles whitened on the steering wheel, eyes constantly alternating between the path ahead and the rearview mirror. After what seemed an eternity, but likely represented mere minutes, the truck emerged onto the main forest road. I accelerated immediately, the improved surface allowing significantly greater speed. Trees flashed past in peripheral vision as I focused intensely on maintaining control while maximizing velocity. Despite rational awareness that I had likely escaped whatever threat the strange figure might have posed, an overwhelming compulsion to put maximum distance between myself and that location persisted. I drove without pause for nearly an hour, eventually reaching a small roadside convenience store on the outskirts of civilization. Only after parking beside the mundane establishment did I allow myself to relax marginally. The ordinary sight of people purchasing gas and snacks provided stark contrast to my morning's experience, anchoring me once again in normality's comforting embrace. I entered the store, purchased coffee and a prepackaged sandwich, then sat in my truck consuming both while processing recent events. The encounter with the plastic-adorned figure continued defying logical explanation. Their behavior exhibited neither the characteristics of a homeless individual seeking assistance nor those of someone intending harm. The deliberate refusal to show their face, the methodical circling, the complete absence of verbal communication, all suggested something beyond typical human interaction. As caffeine cleared residual fatigue, new questions emerged. Had James deliberately directed me to that specific location? His insistence on the spot's isolation, his emphasis on privacy, his knowledge of the hidden path, all now seemed potentially suspicious rather than helpful. Had he known about the strange figure? Was there some connection between them? More disturbing still was the realization that the plastic-covered figure had likely been present throughout the night. The footsteps I'd heard, the scratching against my truck, these now found explanation in their presence. How long had they observed me? Had they approached while I slept? What might have transpired had I used the tent rather than seeking refuge in my truck? The drive home proceeded without incident, traffic increasing steadily as I approached urban areas. Streets filled with pedestrians, storefronts displaying their wares, traffic signals regulating movement. The mundane infrastructure of civilization provided profound comfort after my wilderness experience. Upon reaching my apartment, I unloaded only essential items, leaving most camping equipment in the truck for later retrieval. A hot shower washed away physical grime, but did little to cleanse mental residue. Images of the plastic-adorned figure continued intruding into consciousness, accompanied by renewed analysis of their possible motives and nature. Exhaustion eventually claimed me. I collapsed onto my bed, curtains drawn against afternoon sunlight, and immediately descended into deep, dreamless sleep. When consciousness returned, evening had arrived, my apartment shrouded in darkness. I activated a lamp, its warm glow dispelling shadows but not lingering unease. Hunger drove me to the kitchen, where I prepared a simple meal more from necessity than appetite. As I ate mechanically, my thoughts continued circling back to the strange encounter. Something about the plastic bags particularly disturbed me. Their unnatural rustling, their bizarre arrangement on the figure's body, their incongruity in wilderness setting. Acting on sudden impulse, I retrieved my laptop and began researching unusual behaviors in remote areas. Most initial results described ordinary wilderness encounters with wildlife or disoriented hikers. I refined my search parameters, specifically including plastic bags and strange forest encounters. The fifth search result caused my fork to clatter against the plate. The headline read, "Remains identified in Valley murder case." I clicked the link with trembling fingers, scanning the article's contents with increasing horror. 6 months earlier, authorities had discovered human remains in a remote valley, the same general region where I had camped. The victim, an experienced hiker, had apparently been killed while camping alone. Most disturbing was the article's description of the crime scene. The victim's personal items were found scattered throughout the area, many wrapped in plastic grocery bags tied to surrounding trees. Further research yielded additional articles describing similar cases spanning 5 years, all in the same general region, all involving solo campers, all featuring the bizarre plastic bag signature. Law enforcement suspected a single perpetrator but had made no arrests. The most recent confirmed case had occurred just 3 weeks earlier. I sat motionless before the screen, processing implications. The strange figure I had encountered. Had they been the killer described in these articles? Had James deliberately directed me to a location frequented by this individual? Most chilling was the realization of how vulnerable I had been during those overnight hours. Driven by growing certainty, I searched for information about local residents matching James's description. Nothing definitive emerged, though several forum posts from hikers mentioned encounters with a helpful older man who knew the area intimately. One commenter specifically noted being directed to a perfect hidden campsite that later gave them bad vibes. As night deepened outside my apartment windows, paranoia expanded correspondingly within my mind. I checked door locks repeatedly, positioned a kitchen knife beside my bed, left lights burning throughout the apartment. Sleep, when it finally arrived, came in fragmented intervals punctuated by startling to wakefulness at minor sounds. Morning brought no relief from accumulated dread. I contacted local law enforcement, describing my experience in careful detail while omitting any direct accusations. The officer recording my statement displayed initial skepticism but grew increasingly attentive as I described the plastic bags. He promised to forward the information to detectives handling the ongoing investigation. 3 days passed in uneasy routine. I returned to work, interacted with colleagues, performed daily tasks, all while carrying the psychological weight of my wilderness encounter. Nighttime proved especially difficult, sleep repeatedly interrupted by recreated images of the plastic-adorned figure emerging from darkness. On the 4th day following my return, I finally addressed the camping equipment still cluttering my truck. Most items required cleaning before storage, a task I had continuously postponed. Reluctantly, I began unloading gear onto my apartment's small balcony, organizing items for appropriate treatment. The tent, though unused during the trip, had been hastily stowed during my frantic departure. I removed it from its carrying bag, intending to ensure it was properly dried before extended storage. As the fabric unfolded across concrete flooring, an object fell from its folds, a plastic grocery bag tightly knotted into a compact bundle. I stared at the innocuous item, initially uncomprehending. Then, understanding struck with physical force. I had never opened the tent at the campsite. This object could not have been accidentally included during packing. Someone had deliberately placed it there, likely while I slept in my truck, believing my belongings secure. With tremendous reluctance but driven by morbid necessity, I retrieved a pair of kitchen scissors and carefully cut through the bag's outer layer. Inside was another bag, similarly knotted. This pattern continued through 6 layers, each opening revealing another tightly secured plastic container. At the center of this nested arrangement lay a single item, a small, worn leather wallet. I did not touch this final object, immediately recognizing its probable significance. Instead, I contacted the detective assigned to my case, describing the discovery in precise detail. He arrived within 30 minutes, accompanied by a female colleague. They photographed the arrangement extensively before carefully collecting both the wallet and its plastic wrapping. "Do not touch anything else," the detective instructed while preparing to depart. "We'll need to process your entire vehicle and camping equipment." "Was it his?" I asked, unable to contain the question despite dreading its answer. The detective hesitated before responding. "The wallet appears to match description of property belonging to the victim discovered 3 weeks ago. We'll need to confirm through forensic examination." "He was in my campsite while I slept," I stated, voicing the horrifying conclusion aloud. "He could have, but he didn't," the female detective interjected firmly. "That's significant. In previous cases, victims never had opportunity to report encounters." "Meaning what exactly?" "Meaning something about your situation was different. Perhaps you're using the truck rather than a tent. Perhaps something else entirely." They departed with the evidence, leaving me alone with escalating realization of how narrowly I had avoided becoming another statistic, another body discovered in remote wilderness, possessions distributed in plastic shrouds throughout the surrounding forest. The investigation proceeded with methodical precision. My truck was impounded for forensic examination, yielding multiple fingerprints that matched those found at previous crime scenes. Physical evidence definitively linked my encounter to the series of murders that had occurred throughout the region. Authorities organized an extensive search operation focused on the valley where I had camped. Dozens of officers combed the area for several days, eventually discovering a system of caves approximately 1 mile from my campsite. Within these natural formations, they found evidence suggesting long-term habitation, rudimentary furniture, food storage, discarded clothing. Most disturbing was the collection of personal items apparently taken from victims: watches, jewelry, identification cards, photographs. Each had been meticulously wrapped in multiple layers of plastic grocery bags, then arranged in precise rows along crude shelving. The macabre display contained belongings from all 9 confirmed victims, plus several additional individuals not previously connected to the investigation. Despite this substantial discovery, the perpetrator remained elusive. Forensic evidence indicated the cave had been recently abandoned, likely immediately following my encounter with the plastic-adorned figure. Extensive manhunts throughout surrounding wilderness yielded no further sign of the individual's whereabouts. James proved equally difficult to locate. His description matched no local residents, and no records existed of anyone fitting his characteristics in area property ownership or rental databases. Several hikers reported similar encounters over preceding years, but details remained frustratingly inconsistent. Whether he represented an actual accomplice or merely a convenient invention by the primary perpetrator remained unresolved. Throughout subsequent weeks, I cooperated fully with ongoing investigation, providing multiple statements and reviewing photographs of potential suspects. Sleep remained elusive, nightmares frequent. I installed additional security measures throughout my apartment, though rational assessment suggested minimal risk of the perpetrator pursuing me into urban environments. The detective originally assigned to my case maintained regular contact, updating me on investigative developments while simultaneously extracting additional details as my recollection evolved. During one such conversation, he posed a question that had apparently emerged during behavioral analysis of the case. "Your podcast," he began carefully. "You mentioned having comedy playing throughout the evening. Could you hear it from outside the truck?" "Definitely," I confirmed. The volume was fairly high. He nodded thoughtfully. The behavioral analysts believed that might be significant. Previous victims were generally found with headphones or other indicators they had been listening to content privately. "You think the laughter deterred him somehow?" "Possibly. These types of offenders often construct elaborate fantasies around their actions. Something about hearing laughter, multiple voices, might have disrupted his preferred scenario. This theory provided cold comfort, my survival potentially hinging on a random decision to play comedy aloud rather than through headphones. How easily minor choices altered fundamental outcomes. I found myself continuously reconstructing the experience, identifying countless moments where different actions might have resulted in drastically different conclusions. Months passed with decreasing frequency of official contact. The investigation continued, but with diminishing intensity, as resources were gradually reallocated to more immediate cases. The perpetrator's trail had grown cold, leading authorities to speculate they had permanently departed the region. I never returned to wilderness camping, finding even maintained campgrounds with nearby occupants excessively triggering. Dreams frequently transported me back to that remote clearing, the plastic-adorned figure emerging from darkness with infinitely greater menace than reality had presented. Therapy provided coping mechanisms, but no resolution to lingering trauma. 1 year after the encounter, the detective called with final official update. "We're classifying the case as inactive," he explained, professional tone masking evident frustration. "Without new evidence or additional incidents, we've exhausted investigative avenues." "You think he's gone? Moved to another location?" A heavy sigh preceded his response. "If historical patterns hold, offenders with this level of organization don't typically stop voluntarily. We've distributed information to agencies nationwide, but..." The unfinished sentence conveyed volumes. Somewhere, perhaps, another remote wilderness hosted similar horrors. Another helpful stranger directed unsuspecting campers to perfectly isolated locations. Another plastic-adorned figure observed from darkness, waiting for optimal opportunity. I frequently consider how narrowly circumstance separated me from those less fortunate victims. The truck rather than tent. The comedy voices creating illusion of company. The confrontation forcing retreat rather than escalation. So many arbitrary factors determining survival versus demise. When asked about the experience, which occurs with decreasing frequency as years pass, I provide sanitized versions omitting most disturbing elements. Yet privately, certain images remain permanently etched in consciousness. Plastic bags rustling in morning breeze, a figure perpetually turned away, refusing direct observation, forest shadows seeming to move with deliberate intent. I know with absolute certainty that God spared me from whatever fate awaited in that isolated clearing. Yet knowledge provides limited comfort during nights when sleep proves elusive and memory resurrects details with unwelcome clarity. In such moments, I find myself listening intently for sounds beyond my secured doors, imagining plastic rustling in darkness, wondering if something observed from beyond illumination's boundary. The most persistent question remains unanswered despite extensive consideration. What might I have seen had the figure turned to face me directly? This uncertainty, perhaps mercifully, will likely remain unresolved. Some mysteries, I have reluctantly concluded, deserve permanent concealment behind veils of unknowing. The Navajo National Forest wasn't on any tourist maps. That's precisely why I'd chosen it for our annual hiking trip. After 5 years of increasingly crowded trails and national parks, I wanted something remote, untouched, somewhere I could disappear for a week and truly disconnect. My two longtime friends, Mike and Jason, had reluctantly agreed. They trusted my wilderness experience, even if they privately questioned the wisdom of venturing so far from civilization. We'd met in college 10 years ago, bonding over weekend backpacking trips. Now in our mid-30s, these annual excursions were our escape from corporate jobs and mounting responsibilities. "You sure we're still on BLM land?" Mike asked, adjusting his pack as we paused at a ridge overlooking miles of dense pine forest. His breath clouded in the early October air. "According to the GPS, we're about 2 miles from the reservation boundary," I replied, checking my handheld unit. "We'll make camp well before we reach it." Jason took a long drink from his water bottle. "Remind me why we couldn't just go to Yosemite like normal people?" I smiled but didn't answer. How could I explain the growing sense of suffocation I'd felt lately? The need to push beyond the comfortable and familiar. These woods called to me in a way I couldn't articulate. We continued our descent into the valley, following a faint game trail. The forest grew denser, old-growth pines towering above us, their canopy filtering the afternoon sunlight into hazy beams. The silence was absolute. No distant highway noise, no passing airplanes, just the occasional rustle of wind through branches and our boots on the needle-covered ground. "No cell service," Mike noted, checking his phone before tucking it away. "That's the point," I replied. "Complete digital detox." By late afternoon, we'd found an ideal camping spot near a small stream. We worked efficiently, setting up our tents in a small clearing and gathering firewood before darkness fell. Years of friendship had turned us into a well-oiled machine when it came to wilderness camping. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the trees, I noticed Mike staring intently at something across the clearing. "What is it?" I asked, following his gaze. "Nothing," he said, shaking his head. "Thought I saw something move over there, but it was probably just a deer." We settled around the campfire as night descended, cooking freeze-dried meals and sharing a flask of whiskey. The stars emerged above the gaps in the canopy, brilliant and countless in the true darkness, only found in places far from human habitation. "You know this area is steeped in Navajo folklore," Jason said, warming his hands by the fire. "My grandfather used to tell me stories about these forests." I raised an eyebrow. "I didn't know your grandfather was Navajo." "He wasn't. He worked on the reservation as a doctor in the 70s, picked up a lot of stories during his time there." Jason lowered his voice dramatically. He said these woods were considered dangerous, not just because of the rugged terrain, but because of what might live here. Mike groaned. "Please tell me you're not about to launch into a ghost story." "Not ghosts," Jason continued. "The old-timers talked about skinwalkers, medicine men who'd gone bad, who could transform themselves into animals. They were said to stalk anyone who ventured too far into their territory. That's just stories to keep people from trespassing on sacred land, I said dismissively, though something about Jason's words sent a ripple of unease through me. Maybe, Jason shrugged, but my grandfather said the Navajo Rangers wouldn't go into certain parts of these forests alone, even in daylight. We fell silent, the crackling of the fire suddenly louder in the stillness. I'm turning in, Mike announced, draining the last of his whiskey. Early start tomorrow, right? We retired to our separate tents, the vastness of the wilderness suddenly more palpable in the darkness. I lay in my sleeping bag, listening to the night sounds, the gentle gurgle of the stream, the occasional hoot of an owl, the soft whisper of wind through pine needles. I must have drifted off because I awoke suddenly, fully alert. Something had changed. The forest had gone completely silent, no insects chirping, no nocturnal rustling. I checked my watch. 2:17 a.m. Outside my tent, I heard the distinctive sound of footsteps, not the four-legged gait of a deer or elk, but bipedal steps, careful and deliberate, circling our campsite. My heart hammered in my chest as I lay perfectly still, straining to hear. The footsteps paused near my tent. I held my breath. Then they continued, moving away into the forest. The normal sounds of the night gradually returned, as if released from a spell. I told myself it was probably a curious bear, walking momentarily on hind legs to investigate our campsite. Or perhaps a forest ranger on night patrol, though I knew that was unlikely given how remote we were. Either way, our food was properly stored in bear-proof containers away from the tents. We'd be fine. But as I drifted back to uneasy sleep, a third possibility occurred to me, one I quickly dismissed as irrational. What if Jason's stories had some basis in truth? Morning arrived with golden light filtering through the trees and condensation beating on our tents. As I emerged, stretching away the stiffness of night, I noticed something strange, a series of markings in the soft earth at the edge of our clearing. They resembled footprints, but oddly elongated and deeper at the toe than the heel, as if whatever made them had been running on the balls of its feet. I was still examining them when Mike emerged from his tent. "What have you got there?" he asked, coming to stand beside me. "Animal tracks," I said quickly, suddenly reluctant to voice my concerns. "Probably coyote." Mike frowned. "Those don't look like any coyote tracks I've seen." "We should get moving if we want to reach the ridge by midday," I said, changing the subject. As I turned to wake Jason, my gaze swept the tree line. For just an instant, I thought I saw a figure standing motionless among the distant pines, tall, unnaturally still, watching. I blinked, and it was gone. Just my imagination. It had to be. Yet as we broke camp and shouldered our packs, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being observed, assessed. The forest no longer felt welcoming. It felt like we were trespassing. And somewhere in the back of my mind, Jason's words echoed. The old-timers talked about skinwalkers, medicine men who'd gone bad, who could transform themselves into animals. They were said to stalk anyone who ventured too far into their territory. We were definitely in someone's or something's territory now. The day's hike took us deeper into the wilderness, following the contours of a narrow valley that wound between increasingly steep ridges. The terrain grew more challenging, the trail fading to little more than occasional game paths that required careful navigation. "You sure you know where we're going?" Jason asked as we paused to consult the map. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool October air. "Roughly," I admitted. "This area isn't well mapped, but we're heading toward that ridge." I pointed to a distant line of cliffs visible through gaps in the trees. "There's supposedly an amazing viewpoint up there." Mike took a long drink from his water bottle. "I get the feeling we're the first people to hike through here in years." He wasn't wrong. The forest had a pristine quality that spoke of long isolation from human interference. Fallen trees lay where they had toppled decades ago, slowly being reclaimed by moss and fungi. In places, the undergrowth was so dense we had to navigate around it rather than push through. Around midday, we stopped in a small clearing for lunch. As I was digging through my pack for my food bag, I noticed Jason staring intently into the woods. "What is it?" I asked. I keep seeing movement out of the corner of my eye, he said quietly. Like something's pacing us just beyond the tree line. Mike rolled his eyes. It's those skinwalker stories you were telling last night? Now you've got yourself spooked. Maybe, Jason conceded, but he didn't look convinced. I didn't mention that I'd had the same sensation all morning, a prickling awareness that we were being watched, followed. Several times I'd turned quickly, hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever was causing that feeling, but I'd seen nothing definitive. We continued our hike after lunch, the terrain growing steeper as we began ascending toward the ridge. The forest changed character as we climbed, the trees becoming more stunted and widely spaced, allowing broader views of our surroundings. It was during one of our rest breaks that I saw it, a strange arrangement of stones at the base of a lightning-struck pine. 7 smooth river rocks placed in a perfect circle, with a larger rock in the center. It was clearly deliberate, not any natural formation. Hey guys, check this out, I called. Mike shrugged when he saw it, probably left by other hikers. You said yourself we're likely the first people through here in years, I reminded him. Jason crouched to examine the stone circle more closely. This doesn't look recent. These stones are partially embedded in the soil like they've been here a long time. Some kind of trail marker, Mike suggested, though he sounded uncertain. Maybe, I said, though something about the arrangement made me uneasy. It reminded me of boundary markers I'd seen on other tribal lands, warnings to go no further. We continued hiking, but the discovery of the stone circle had changed something. We talked less, each lost in our own thoughts, more attentive to our surroundings. I found myself constantly scanning the trees around us, that feeling of being observed growing stronger. As the afternoon wore on, we began encountering more unusual signs. A tree with deep gouges in its trunk, too high and too wide spaced to be from a bear. A deer carcass picked clean, but with the bones arranged in an unnatural pattern. More stone circles, appearing at increasingly frequent intervals. Okay, this is getting weird, Mike finally admitted after we found 3 stone circles within 100 yards of each other. We should turn back, Jason said, his earlier skepticism gone. Head back to the campsite from last night and then out to the trailhead tomorrow. I wanted to agree with him, but something pushed me forward, a mixture of curiosity and stubborn pride. We're almost to the ridge. Let's at least make it there, set up camp, and we can head back in the morning. They reluctantly agreed, though the mood had shifted dramatically. We hiked in tight formation now, no longer spreading out as we'd done earlier. Every snapping twig or rustle in the undergrowth made us pause and look around. We reached the base of the ridge as the sun was beginning to set, its light turning the western sky a deep orange. The climb to the top would have to wait until morning. Let's set up camp here, I suggested, indicating a relatively flat area with good visibility in all directions. As we unpacked our gear, I noticed that Mike kept looking over his shoulder. Everything okay? I asked him quietly. I keep seeing something moving between the trees, he admitted, his voice low. Just glimpses. It's tall, walking on 2 legs, but it doesn't move like a person. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the cooling evening air. Probably just a deer standing on its hind legs to reach foliage, I said, not believing it myself. Mike gave me a look that said he wasn't buying it either. We built a larger fire than usual that night, none of us saying why, but all understanding the reason. As darkness fell completely, the forest around us came alive with sounds. Too many sounds, too close, as if we were surrounded by creatures just beyond the reach of our firelight. Anyone else notice how the wildlife seems unusually active tonight? Jason asked, trying to keep his voice casual. I nodded, feeding another branch into the fire. It's like they're agitated about something. Or someone, Mike added quietly. We ate in silence, the weight of the wilderness pressing in around us. Just as we were finishing, a long, wavering cry echoed through the valley. Not quite a wolf's howl, not quite a human scream, but something horrifyingly in between. We froze, looking at each other with wide eyes. Mountain lion, I said quickly. They can sound almost human sometimes. That wasn't a mountain lion, Jason whispered. his face pale in the firelight. The cry came again, closer this time, followed by a series of yipping sounds that mimicked coyotes but weren't quite right. The rhythm was off, the pitch too deliberate. "Whatever it is, it's mimicking animal sounds," Mike said, his voice tight with fear. "Let's get in the tents," I suggested, trying to project a calmness I didn't feel. "Animals are curious, but generally avoid humans. We'll be fine." None of us believed it, but we went through the motions, banking the fire, storing our food away from camp, retreating to our tents. I lay in my sleeping bag, fully clothed, my hunting knife within easy reach, listening to the strange calls moving around our campsite. I must have dozed off despite my fear, because I jolted awake sometime later to absolute silence. My watch read 3:14 a.m. The night creatures had gone quiet again, just like the previous night. Then came the footsteps, the same bipedal gait I'd heard before, but no longer cautious. Whatever was out there was moving with purpose now, circling our camp in ever-tightening loops. I lay perfectly still, barely breathing, as the steps came closer to my tent. They stopped just outside the thin fabric wall. I could hear breathing, ragged, wet, not quite human. Something pressed against the side of the tent, a hand or paw, pushing with enough force to bend the fabric inward. I clutched my knife, heart pounding so loudly I was sure it could be heard. The canvas wall bulged further, the pressure increasing. I prepared to slash at whatever was about to come through. Then, from across the campsite came the sound of a tent zipper, Mike or Jason emerging from their shelter. The pressure against my tent immediately vanished. Rapid footsteps retreated into the forest, accompanied by the crack of breaking branches. "Hello?" came Mike's uncertain voice. "Is someone out there?" I unzipped my tent with shaking hands and emerged into the moonlit clearing. "Mike, you okay?" He stood by his tent, flashlight sweeping the tree line. Something was messing with my backpack. I heard it rummaging around. Jason emerged from his tent a moment later, looking disoriented from being suddenly awakened. "What's going on?" "We had a visitor," I said grimly, pointing my own flashlight toward the edge of our camp. In the soft earth were those same elongated footprints I'd seen that morning, but now there were dozens of them circling our tents. And something else. A symbol scratched into the dirt, a crude stick figure with an animal head. None of us slept again that night. We rebuilt the fire and sat around it until dawn, jumping at every sound from the darkness beyond. As the first light of morning filtered through the trees, we made a unanimous decision without needing to discuss it. We were getting out of these woods today, viewpoint be damned. Something was stalking us, something that walked like a man but wasn't. And it was getting bolder. We broke camp at first light, packing quickly and with minimal conversation. The strange footprints were still visible in the morning dew, a stark reminder that last night's terror hadn't been a shared nightmare. "Should we try to hike all the way out today?" Jason asked as we shouldered our packs. I consulted the map, calculating distances. It's at least 15 miles back to the trailhead. With this terrain, I'm not sure we can make it before dark. Mike scanned the surrounding forest nervously. "I'd rather hike in the dark than spend another night out here." "Agreed," I said, folding the map. "We'll push as hard as we can, use headlamps if necessary." We set off at a rapid pace, retracing our route from the previous day. The forest felt different now, the beauty and serenity replaced by a sense of hostile watchfulness. Every shadow held potential threats. Every unexplained sound made us pause and look around. About an hour into our hike, Mike suddenly stopped. "Wait, this isn't right." I looked around, momentarily disoriented. He was correct. The landscape didn't match my memory from yesterday. The ridge that should have been on our left was now behind us. "We must have taken a wrong turn," I said, pulling out the map and GPS unit. Jason joined us, breathing heavily from the pace we'd been maintaining. "Where are we?" I studied the GPS coordinates with growing concern. According to the device, we were heading northeast, almost the opposite direction from the trailhead. "This can't be right," I muttered. tapping the unit. "We've been following our tracks from yesterday." "Have we?" Mike asked quietly. I looked down at the trail we'd been following. The impressions in the soft forest floor did resemble our boot prints, but examining them more closely, I noticed subtle differences. The tread pattern wasn't quite right, the spacing slightly off. "They're not our tracks," I admitted, a cold knot forming in my stomach. "Then whose are they?" Jason asked. None of us wanted to voice the obvious question. What kind of creature could mimic human boot prints? I consulted the compass on my GPS unit, determined the correct direction, and set us on a new course. "This way. Keep your eyes open and stay close together." We moved more cautiously now, frequently checking our bearings. The terrain grew increasingly unfamiliar. Massive rock formations I didn't remember passing, dense thickets that seemed impassable. "Something's wrong," Jason said after we'd been hiking for another hour. "It's like the landscape has changed overnight." "Or we're being led somewhere," Mike suggested, voicing what we'd all been thinking. The realization settled heavily upon us. Whatever was stalking us was intelligent, capable of strategy. It wasn't just following us, it was hurting us. Around midday, we emerged from a particularly dense section of forest into a small clearing and stopped abruptly. In the center stood a crude structure, a framework of branches lashed together with what looked like sinew, draped with animal hides. The ground around it was littered with bones, deer, rabbit, and disturbingly, what appeared to be the jawbone of a much larger animal. "Is that human?" Jason whispered, pointing at the jawbone. "Too big," I said quickly. "Probably elk or moose." But the shape was wrong for either of those animals, and we all knew it. "We need to get out of here. Now," Mike urged, already backing away. As we turned to leave, movement caught my eye, something darting between trees at the far edge of the clearing. It was too quick for me to make out details, just an impression of height and unnatural thinness, moving with a jerky, loping gait. "Run!" I shouted, all pretense of calm evaporating. We crashed through the underbrush, abandoning the trail entirely, driven by pure instinct to put distance between ourselves and that clearing. I could hear something moving through the forest behind us, not directly following, but paralleling our course, occasionally crashing through the brush to drive us in a particular direction. It was hurting us again. I realized this too late. We emerged from the trees onto the edge of a steep ravine, nearly tumbling over before skidding to a halt. Below us, a rocky streambed wound through a narrow canyon, at least 100-foot drop, with no safe way down. "We're trapped," Jason panted, looking frantically for an escape route. "It's driving us toward the reservation boundary," I realized, checking the GPS. "We're almost at the edge of public land." "So what? We cross it," Mike said urgently. "I'd rather apologize for trespassing than die out here." A series of sharp staccato sounds, like wood striking wood, echoed through the forest behind us. They came from multiple directions, suggesting we were surrounded. "Those are warning signals," Jason said, his face pale. "My grandfather described them. The Navajo Rangers use them to communicate in the forest without speaking." "Or something that's learned to mimic them does," I said grimly. We stood indecisively at the edge of the ravine, caught between the danger behind and the impossible descent before us. "There," Mike pointed suddenly. "About 50 yards downstream, the ravine wall looks less steep. We might be able to climb down there." It was a desperate option, but our only one. We moved along the edge of the ravine, constantly glancing back at the forest line. The wooden clacking sounds continued, always just out of sight, matching our pace. The spot Mike had identified was marginally better, a slope of about 70 degrees rather than a sheer drop covered in loose scree and occasional stunted pines that might provide handholds. "I'll go first," I volunteered, slipping my backpack off and lowering it carefully ahead of me as I began the treacherous descent. The climb down was harrowing. Loose rocks dislodged under our feet, triggering small avalanches. Several times one of us would slip, saved only by grabbing onto exposed roots or the other's outstretched hands. By the time we reached the bottom, we were covered in dirt and minor cuts, but alive. The stream at the bottom of the ravine was shallow but swift, cutting through a narrow canyon of stratified red rock. It might provide a way out. Water always leads somewhere. Downstream, I decided, pointing to where the canyon seemed to widen. We'll follow the water. We had gone perhaps a quarter mile when Jason, who was bringing up the rear, called out in alarm, "Look, on the ridge!" I turned to see a figure silhouetted against the afternoon sky at the edge of the ravine where we had started our descent. Even at this distance, something about its proportions was wrong. Too tall, too thin, its limbs slightly too long for its body. It stood perfectly still, watching us. "Don't run," I said quietly. "That's what it wants. It's been driving us like cattle." "What do we do?" Mike asked, his voice trembling slightly. "We keep moving, but deliberately. Stay together." We continued downstream, maintaining a steady pace, constantly aware of the figure watching from above. Occasionally it would disappear, only to reappear further along the ridge, having somehow traversed distances much faster than should have been possible. The canyon gradually widened, its walls becoming less steep. Eventually, we found a place where we could climb out, emerging onto a rolling landscape of pinyon pines and juniper. By now, the sun was low in the western sky. We'd been walking for hours, driven off our planned route, with no clear idea of where we were in relation to the trailhead. "The GPS says we're about 8 miles from where we parked," I said, checking the unit. "But we'd have to cross back through that forest to get there." "No way," Jason said firmly. "We need another option." Mike unfolded the map. "Look, there's a ranger station marked here on the eastern edge of the reservation. It's about 4 miles from our current position." "That's our best bet," I agreed. "We can explain our situation, maybe get a ride back to our car." We set off toward the ranger station, moving through increasingly open terrain as the sun began to set. The sense of being watched never left us, but the open landscape offered fewer hiding places for our stalker. As darkness fell, we were forced to use our headlamps, creating small pools of light in the vast darkness. The night sounds started up around us, crickets, distant owl calls, the rustle of nocturnal creatures. Then, cutting through these familiar sounds, came that same cry we'd heard the previous night, part howl, part scream, much closer now. It was answered by another from a different direction, then a third. "There's more than one," Mike whispered, his face ghostly in the reflected light of his headlamp. "Keep moving," I urged. "The ranger station can't be far now." We quickened our pace, pushing through exhaustion, driven by the knowledge that stopping meant death. The cries continued, moving parallel to us, sometimes ahead, sometimes behind, creating the unmistakable impression that we were being circled. Then, through the trees ahead, I spotted a glimmer of light. Steady, artificial illumination. "There," I pointed. "That must be the ranger station." Relief surged through us, giving our tired legs new energy. We moved faster, the lights growing brighter, resolving into the outline of a small compound, a main building with a radio antenna, a couple of outbuildings, a parked truck. We were less than 100 yards away when the most horrifying sound yet tore through the night, a perfect imitation of a human voice, calling out in what sounded like my own voice. "Help! Over here! I'm hurt!" It came from the darkness to our right, so convincing that we instinctively turned toward it before realizing the deception. "Don't stop," I shouted, pushing the others forward. "That's not a person." We sprinted the final distance to the ranger station, the mimicked cries for help morphing into something else, a sound of rage and frustration that no human throat could produce. As we burst into the circle of light surrounding the station, the sounds abruptly ceased. The night beyond the light was silent, watching. I pounded on the door of the main building, praying someone was inside. After what seemed an eternity, but was probably only seconds, the door opened to reveal a middle-aged Navajo man in a ranger uniform, his expression changing from annoyance to concern as he took in our disheveled, terrified appearance. "Please," I gasped, "something's been stalking us in the forest. We need help." The ranger's face grew grave. He ushered us inside and locked the door firmly behind us. "You've crossed paths with something ancient," he said quietly. "Something that doesn't want you in its territory." As he spoke, something heavy slammed against the outer wall of the station, making us all jump. The ranger didn't seem surprised, just resigned, as if this was a situation he'd encountered before. "Don't worry," he assured us, though his eyes remained troubled. "It can't enter here, but we need to get you off the reservation by morning." Through the window, just at the edge of the station's security lights, I caught a glimpse of movement, a tall, emaciated figure that moved with unnatural quickness, circling the perimeter of the light. Its proportions were wrong, its movements jerky yet purposeful. I only saw it clearly for an instant before it melted back into the darkness, but that glimpse was enough to haunt my nightmares for years to come. We were safe for now, but dawn was hours away. And beyond these walls, something waited, patient, intelligent, and utterly inhuman. The ranger station's interior was sparse but mercifully warm after our ordeal in the wilderness. A wood stove radiated heat from one corner, its globe providing most of the illumination in the main room. Maps covered one wall, a radio set up another. A door in the back presumably led to living quarters. The ranger, who introduced himself as Ben, offered us coffee from a pot that had been simmering on the stove. His calm demeanor was reassuring, though his eyes constantly darted to the windows, checking the darkness beyond. "You're lucky," he said as we warmed our hands around the mugs. "Not many people who encounter such things make it to safety." "You know what's out there?" Jason asked. Ben was silent for a moment, seemingly weighing his words carefully. "There are things in these forests that predate European settlement, predating even many native traditions. The Diné, what you call Navajo, have stories going back generations about entities that walk between worlds." "Walkers," I said quietly. His expression tightened. "We don't use that term carelessly, but yes, something like that." "Those are just stories," Mike insisted, though his voice lacked conviction after what we'd experienced. "Are they?" Ben asked mildly. "You saw something out there that stalked you systematically, that mimicked human voices, that understood how to herd you like prey. Does that sound like any natural animal you know?" None of us had an answer. "I've worked these forests for 27 years, Ben continued. "Most of that time things were quiet, but in the last decade, something's changed. The old ones are growing bolder, venturing beyond their traditional territories." "Why?" I asked. "Climate change, habitat destruction, increased human activity in remote areas. Take your pick." He shrugged. "The balance is shifting. They're adapting, perhaps more successfully than we are." Outside, something scraped against the metal siding of the station. Long, deliberate strokes, like claws being dragged across the surface. None of us acknowledged the sound, though we all heard it. "What can you tell us about what we encountered?" Jason asked, leaning forward. Ben hesitated. "Speaking of such things can attract their attention, but you've already crossed paths with it, so..." He sighed. "The entity you encountered is known to the tribal elders as the one who watches from shadows. It's a mimic, a shapeshifter of sorts, though not in the way Hollywood portrays such things." "What does it want?" I asked. "Territory, dominance, food." Ben's expression was grim. "These beings were once medicine men who broke tribal taboos, using forbidden practices to gain power. The transformation corrupts them over time until little humanity remains. They're territorial predators now, seeing humans as either intruders or prey." "You're saying it's some kind of..." "What? Supernatural cannibal?" Mike asked incredulously. "I'm saying there are things in this world that defy your understanding of natural," Ben replied evenly. "Whether you call it supernatural, paranormal, or just unknown biology doesn't much matter when it's hunting you." Another sound from outside, that same wooden clacking we'd heard in the forest, now coming from multiple directions around the station. "There are more of them out there," Ben said quietly, moving to check that the shutters were secure. "They rarely gather in groups unless threatened or very hungry." "What do we do?" Jason asked, panic edging into his voice. "We wait for dawn. They're strongest at night, especially during the dark of the moon. Once daylight comes, I can drive you back to your vehicle." "And if they attack before then?" I asked. Ben moved to a cabinet against the far wall, unlocking it to reveal several shotguns and rifles. "Conventional weapons can hurt them, though not always fatally. They're flesh and blood, despite what the stories say. But they're intelligent, patient, and nearly impossible to hit unless they want to be seen." He handed each of us a shotgun. I don't expect you'll need these inside, but just in case. The weight of the weapon was reassuring in my hands, though I wondered how effective it would actually be against what I'd glimpsed at the edge of the light. As the night deepened, the sounds outside the station intensified. Strange cries, mimicked voices calling out using our names and inflections, the constant scratching at the walls and roof. It was psychological warfare, designed to wear us down, to make us panic and flee into the darkness. "How do you know so much about them?" I asked Ben during a lull in the auditory assault. His expression grew distant. My grandfather was a tribal police officer back in the 70s. He responded to a series of disappearances in this same region. Hikers, campers, even a few locals who should have known better than to venture into certain areas alone. He tracked one of these entities for days, following a trail of mutilated wildlife and strange markings. Ben rolled up his sleeve to reveal a series of parallel scars running from wrist to elbow. He wasn't alone on that last night of tracking. I was 12, stubbornly tagging along despite his warnings. When it attacked our camp, he saved my life, but lost his own. The terrible implication hung in the air. These creatures had been hunting in these forests for decades, perhaps centuries, largely unnoticed by the outside world. "Why isn't this common knowledge?" Mike asked. "Why aren't there warnings?" Ben gave a bitter laugh. Who would believe it? And those who might potentially believe, other tribal members, already know to avoid certain areas. As for the rest, evidence has a way of disappearing, and survivors like yourselves are usually dismissed as suffering from exposure, paranoia, or substance-induced hallucinations. Around 3 a.m., the attacks intensified. Something heavy slammed repeatedly against the door, testing its strength. The windows rattled in their frames as unseen entities pressed against them. The mimicry grew more sophisticated, perfect imitations of our voices having conversations, calling for help, screaming in pain. "They're trying to draw us out," Ben explained, his voice steady despite the cacophony, "or make us so afraid we do something stupid." "Like what?" Jason asked. Before Ben could answer, a new sound cut through the chaos, the crack of breaking glass from the back of the station. "The living quarters," Ben said sharply, grabbing his rifle. "Stay here." He disappeared through the door at the back. Seconds later, we heard a shotgun blast, followed by an inhuman shriek of pain that quickly transmuted into rage. Ben backed into the main room, his rifle trained on the doorway. "They've broken the bedroom window. We need to barricade that door." We quickly dragged a heavy desk in front of the door, securing it as best we could. The shrieks continued from the back room, joined by sounds of destruction, furniture being overturned, glass shattering. "Did you hit it?" I asked. "Yes, but these entities are incredibly resilient," Ben replied, reloading his weapon. "It'll be back, and angrier." As if on cue, something hit the barricaded door with tremendous force, causing the desk to slide several inches across the floor, despite our weight against it. "We can't stay here," Ben decided. "My truck is just outside the front door. If we make a run for it, we might be able to reach it before they can regroup." It was a desperate plan, but our options were dwindling. The barricaded door shuddered again under another impact, the wood beginning to splinter. "On my count," Ben said, moving to the front door with his keys in hand. 3, 2, 1, go! He threw open the door, and we burst into the night, running for the truck parked about 20 yards away. The security lights around the station provided some visibility, but the darkness beyond seemed alive with movement, tall, spindly shapes converging rapidly. Ben reached the truck first, unlocking it and jumping into the driver's seat. Mike was next, diving into the passenger side. Jason and I were only steps behind when something erupted from beneath the vehicle, a pale, emaciated figure that moved with terrifying speed. It caught Jason by the ankle, sending him sprawling. I turned back, firing the shotgun instinctively. The blast caught the creature in the shoulder, spinning it away from Jason with a spray of dark fluid that looked black in the artificial light. I grabbed Jason's arm, hauling him to his feet, and we scrambled into the truck's back seat as more shapes emerged from the darkness, converging on the vehicle. Ben gunned the engine, the truck's tires spinning in the dirt before finding traction. We lurched forward, narrowly missing one of the creatures that lunged for the driver's side door. As we accelerated away from the station, I caught a clear glimpse of our pursuers in the headlights. Gaunt, humanoid figures with unnaturally elongated limbs and distorted faces that seemed caught between human and animal features. Their skin was a sickly grayish-white, stretched taut over prominent bones, and they moved with a jerky, unsettling gait that was nonetheless incredibly fast. "Don't look at them," Ben shouted, noticing my horrified fascination. "Direct eye contact is dangerous. It's how they get in your head." I tore my gaze away, but not before seeing one of the creatures drop to all fours and begin pursuing the truck with impossible speed, keeping pace even as Ben pushed the vehicle to its limits on the rough forest road. "They can outrun a vehicle?" Mike asked incredulously. "For short distances," Ben confirmed grimly. "But they can't maintain that speed for long. If we can reach the main road, we'll be safe." The truck bounced violently as Ben navigated the uneven terrain, the headlights cutting a narrow swath through the darkness. In the side mirror, I could see our pursuers gradually falling behind, their forms becoming indistinct shapes in the darkness. But one remained, the largest of them, matching our pace with unnatural endurance. As if sensing my observation, it looked directly at the mirror, its eyes reflecting the taillight's glow with an eerie red luminescence. For a moment, just an instant, I felt a terrible pressure in my mind, as if something was trying to force its way in. Whispered thoughts that weren't my own suggested I should open the door, step out, join the hunt. "Look away!" Ben shouted, noticing my transfixed stare in the mirror. "It's trying to enthrall you." I wrenched my gaze forward, the pressure in my mind receding but leaving behind a lingering sense of violation. "What was that?" I gasped. "Mental influence," Ben explained tensely, navigating a sharp turn. "That's how they lure solitary hikers, making them hear things, see things, wander off trails. The strongest ones can briefly control susceptible minds if given the chance." The realization was terrifying. These weren't just physically dangerous predators, but psychically invasive ones, capable of manipulating perception and thought. After what seemed like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, we reached a paved road. As soon as the truck's tires hit asphalt, the remaining pursuer pulled up short, standing at the edge of the forest. It raised one elongated arm in what almost seemed like a gesture of farewell, or perhaps a promise that our encounter wasn't truly over. "We're outside their territory now," Ben said, his shoulders relaxing slightly as he increased our speed on the improved road surface. "They rarely cross certain boundaries, especially modern infrastructure like paved roads." "Where are we heading?" Jason asked, his voice shaky. "I'm taking you back to your vehicle," Ben replied. "It's about 30 miles from here. You should be there before dawn." As the adrenaline of our escape began to fade, exhaustion set in. But sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those gaunt figures, felt that alien presence trying to infiltrate my thoughts. "What happens now?" I asked Ben as we drove through the night. "You go home, try to forget," he said simply. "Few people ever encounter these entities and live to tell about it. Those who do often find their stories dismissed or ridiculed." "We can't just pretend this didn't happen," I protested. Ben glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "What's your alternative? Go public? You'll be labeled delusional. Try to prove it exists? Good luck. These beings have evaded scientific documentation for centuries. They know when they're being hunted, and they're far better at it than humans." His words settled heavily in the truck's cabin. He was right. We had no evidence beyond our traumatic experience and a few shotgun shells spent in the darkness. "All you can do," Ben continued more gently, "is warn others away from that area. Tell them it's dangerous terrain, mention mountain lion sightings. Any plausible reason to keep people out. That's how we've protected both sides for generations." As we neared our parked vehicle, the eastern sky began to lighten, the first hints of dawn breaking over the distant mountains. The approaching daylight should have been comforting, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd escaped with our lives only because something had allowed it. A predator confident in its territory, knowing we would return to our world carrying its legend, spreading fear that would keep its domain undisturbed. Ben pulled up beside our car, which sat alone in the small gravel parking area that marked the trailhead. "Thank you," I said, meaning it with every fiber of my being. "You saved our lives." He nodded solemnly. "Be careful driving out. Get some rest in the nearest town before continuing home. And," he hesitated, "check yourselves and your belongings carefully. Sometimes they leave marks, ways of tracking those they've encountered." With that cryptic warning, he waited until we'd transferred to our own vehicle before turning his truck around and heading back toward the reservation. As Mike started the engine, I glanced back toward the forest we'd so narrowly escaped. For just a moment, I thought I saw a figure standing at the tree line, tall, unnaturally still, watching our departure. I blinked, and it was gone. But as we drove away, I couldn't escape the certainty that our encounter with the Watcher in the shadows wasn't truly over. That once such entities fix their attention on you, some connection remains, spanning distance and time. And somewhere in those remote forests, ancient predators continued their patient vigil, waiting for the next unwary travelers to cross the invisible boundaries of their domain. 6 months passed since our encounter in the Navajo National Forest. On the surface, life had returned to normal. I was back at my corporate job, answering emails and attending meetings as if nothing had happened, as if I hadn't glimpsed something that fundamentally altered my understanding of reality. Mike and Jason and I spoke less frequently now. Our weekly calls had dwindled to monthly, then occasionally. It wasn't a deliberate distancing, more a mutual unspoken agreement that reminders of our shared experience were too disturbing to face regularly. When we did speak, we never directly referenced what had happened. Instead, we talked around it, using coded language. "How are you sleeping these days?" None of us slept well anymore. "Been hiking lately?" None of us had. "Any unusual visitors?" A question that always raised the hair on my arms. The world felt different after the forest. Crowds made me anxious. Too many places for something to hide in plain sight. Darkness became intolerable without substantial artificial light. The sound of footsteps behind me on empty streets would send my heart racing, forcing me to turn and confront what was invariably just another pedestrian going about their business. I saw a therapist for a while describing my symptoms as PTSD from a wildlife encounter during a camping trip. It wasn't entirely a lie. The coping mechanisms helped somewhat. Grounding techniques for panic attacks, meditation for the insomnia, exposure therapy for the fear of darkness, but nothing could erase what I'd seen. What troubled me most weren't the memories themselves, but the moments when I doubted them. In the harsh light of day, surrounded by the trappings of civilization, it was easy to rationalize our experience. Stress, exhaustion, and fear combining to create shared hallucinations. Perhaps we'd encountered a particularly clever predator, a mountain lion or wolf, and our minds had transformed it into something more sinister. But then night would fall, and with darkness came certainty. The things we'd seen were real. The ranger, Ben, had known about them. They had histories, behaviors, territories. They had been hunting humans for generations. And sometimes in the moments between wakefulness and sleep, I could still feel that alien presence scratching at the edges of my consciousness, as if something had followed me home from those remote forests. It was during one such restless night, about 7 months after our encounter, that I received a text from Jason. "Check your email. Important." The timestamp read 3:17 a.m., that dead hour of the night when the barrier between worlds feels thinnest. I opened my laptop, ignoring the irrational fear that something might be watching through the camera, and found Jason's email waiting with a video attachment. His message was brief. "Hiking forum. Guy went missing in the same area 3 weeks ago. Search team found his GoPro yesterday. Watch the last 40 seconds." The video began normally enough. Standard hiking footage of a young man documenting his solo trek through beautiful wilderness. The timestamp indicated it was from early April, the forest just beginning to green with spring. His narration was typical enthusiastic outdoorsman fare, pointing out interesting plants, commenting on the weather, occasionally consulting his map. Around the 2-minute mark, his demeanor subtly changed. He began glancing over his shoulder more frequently, commenting on strange noises off camera. By minute 5, his pace had quickened. his breathing more labored as he pushed deeper into increasingly dense forest. "Something's been paralleling my trail for the last mile," he said tensely to the camera. "Probably just a deer, but it's weird how it stops when I stop." The footage continued, the hiker growing visibly more agitated as shadows lengthened with the approaching evening. He decided to make camp earlier than planned, setting up his tent in a small clearing surrounded by dense pines. Night fell, the camera's infrared mode engaging, giving the footage an eerie greenish cast. The hiker was inside his tent now, camera pointed at his face as he whispered his growing concerns. "There's something moving around the campsite. I keep hearing footsteps, but when I shine my light, nothing's there. Going to try to get some footage." The camera turned toward the tent entrance as he slowly unzipped it, pointing the lens into the darkness beyond. At first, nothing was visible except trees swaying slightly in the breeze. Then came the last 40 seconds Jason had mentioned. A sound became audible, the same wooden clacking we'd heard during our ordeal. The hiker whispered, "What the hell is that?" as he panned the camera slowly across the clearing, and there, at the edge of the infrared's range, stood a figure. Even with the video's poor quality and the limitations of night filming, its wrongness was immediately apparent. Too tall, too thin, limbs slightly too long for its body. It stood perfectly still, watching the tent. The hiker gasped, the camera shaking with his fear. "Holy shit," he whispered. "There's someone out there." As if in response to his voice, the figure's head tilted at an unnatural angle. Then, with a jerky, unsettling motion, it began moving toward the tent, not walking so much as gliding, covering ground with impossible speed. The hiker cursed, dropping the camera as he scrambled backward. The footage showed only the tent ceiling for several seconds, the audio capturing his panicked breathing and the sound of something moving around the outside of the tent, a deliberate circling, punctuated by that same wooden clacking, now coming from multiple directions. Then silence. After a long moment, the hiker slowly retrieved the camera, pointing it toward the tent entrance again. Nothing was visible outside now. "I think it's gone," he whispered, relief evident in his voice. He began to lower the camera. And that's when it happened. The tent wall behind him bulged inward, a hand-shaped impression pressing through the fabric. The hiker didn't notice, still focused on the tent entrance. The impression deepened, the fabric stretching to its limit. Then, with a swift, violent motion, long fingers punctured through the material, wrapping around the hiker's shoulder. He screamed, the camera capturing a blurred image of his terrified face as he was yanked backward with tremendous force. The camera tumbled to the ground, recording several seconds of chaotic movement and the hiker's diminishing screams before cutting to static. I sat in stunned silence, my body cold with recognition. It was the same entity, or one just like it, that had stalked us through those forests. The same hunting methodology, the same physical characteristics, the same territory. My phone buzzed with another text from Jason. "Called the sheriff's department in that county. They found no trace of him beyond the camera. Search called off yesterday." I typed back with shaking fingers. "Same thing that came after us." Jason's response came quickly. "It's still out there, and there will be more hikers this summer." The implication was clear. What responsibility did we bear, knowing what lurked in those forests? We'd escaped, kept silent, tried to forget. And now someone else had died in the same area. After a long moment, I texted, "What can we do?" No one would believe us. Jason's reply took longer this time. "I've been researching. Found similar incidents going back decades. Different forests, same MO. These things have territories across multiple states. People disappear, searches find nothing, cases go cold." I stared at the message, the full implication sinking in. This wasn't isolated to that one forest. These entities, whatever they were, had ranges that spanned vast wilderness areas, hunting grounds where humans occasionally ventured and sometimes never returned. Another text from Jason. "I'm going back. Not to the same spot. Boundary areas. Need to understand more. Document everything." "That's suicide," I typed frantically. "Not going alone," came his reply. "Meeting someone who knows things. Former Forest Service. Lost a partner to one of these things in Wyoming, 1997. says there are ways to protect yourself. I sat with that information, torn between fear for my friend and the gnawing guilt of inaction. Finally, I texted, "When?" 2 weeks. You in? The rational part of my brain screamed no, to stay away, to forget, to embrace the safety of denial. But deeper than rationality was the certainty that what we'd encountered had fundamentally changed us. We couldn't unknow what we now knew. We couldn't unsee what we'd seen. And if these entities were hunting across multiple wilderness areas, how many more people would vanish without explanation? How many search parties would find nothing but abandoned campsites and inexplicable tracks? How many families would never have closure? I thought of the ranger, Ben, and how he'd dedicated his life to protecting people from threats most couldn't comprehend or acknowledge. I thought of his grandfather, who had died facing these entities to save his grandson. Some knowledge carries responsibility. "I'm in," I typed, "but we need Mike too." "Already asked him," Jason replied. "He said he needs time to think about it." I understood Mike's hesitation. He had a wife, a young daughter, responsibilities that went beyond his own safety. He had the most to lose, but he also understood what we were facing better than most. And 3 days later, when he finally texted both Jason and me, his message was simple. "Can't let you two idiots get yourselves killed without me. I'm in." We spent the next week gathering equipment, consulting with Jason's new contact, preparing for what would certainly be the most dangerous undertaking of our lives. We weren't delusional enough to think we could hunt these entities. They were apex predators in their domain, with advantages we could barely comprehend. But we could document, map territories, identify patterns, create warnings that might save lives. The night before our departure, I stood at my window, looking out at the city lights that had once represented safety and civilization. Now I understood them as merely temporary barriers against ancient forces that had never truly retreated, just withdrawn to wait. Movement in the shadows of the building across the street caught my eye, a tall, unnaturally thin figure standing perfectly still, watching my window. I blinked, and it was gone. Just a trick of light and shadow, or perhaps my overwrought imagination. But as I turned away from the window, a familiar pressure brushed against my consciousness. That same alien presence I'd felt in the forest, trying to work its way into my thoughts. They knew we were coming back. Perhaps they'd always known we would return. Perhaps they'd been patiently waiting, watching from the shadows of our civilized world, biding their time. Tomorrow we would venture back into their territory, armed with knowledge, technology, and determination. Whether we would emerge again remained to be seen. But as I packed the last of my gear, including a journal documenting everything we'd experienced and learned, I felt a grim resolve replacing the paralyzing fear that had haunted me for months. Some threats remain hidden because no one survives to report them. Others remain hidden because survivors aren't believed. But truth has a power of its own, accumulating slowly over time, impossible to fully suppress. The Watchers had existed in shadow for centuries, hunting with impunity. But shadows recede when exposed to light. And we were bringing lights into their darkness: cameras, journals, GPS trackers, communication devices. They were ancient and powerful in their domain. But they had never faced prey that returned deliberately, knowingly, with purpose. As I finally drifted toward uneasy sleep, one thing became clear. Our first encounter with the Watcher in the shadows had been on its terms. Our return would be on ours, and this time we wouldn't be running away. September 15th, 2023. I was 29 years old when my life changed in ways I still struggle to articulate. What began as an innocent weekend camping trip transformed into something I cannot fully explain, even now, months later, as I attempt to document these events. The invitation came on a Tuesday afternoon. My phone buzzed with a message from an old college friend suggesting we gather a small group for an autumn camping trip in the Appalachian wilderness. I hadn't ventured into those remote woods for nearly 3 years, not since our last excursion when we'd sworn to make it an annual tradition. Life, as it often does, had intervened. New jobs, relocations, relationships. The suggestion struck me as exactly what I needed after months of grinding away at my desk job. "Count me in," I replied, surprised by my own enthusiasm. Within hours, our group chat swelled with confirmations. We would be 6 in total, all friends from university days, now scattered across different careers but bound by those formative years. The plan crystallized quickly. We would meet at my friend's rural property that bordered the state forest, venture in on four-wheelers towing supply wagons, and spend 2 nights at a secluded clearing, approximately 7 miles from the nearest marked trail. As the weekend approached, I found myself checking weather forecasts obsessively. A storm system threatened to derail our plans, but forecasters predicted it would clear by Friday morning, leaving behind only dampness and fog. Perfect atmosphere for campfire stories, I thought, not yet understanding how inappropriate that sentiment would prove to be. Thursday night I packed methodically, thermal layers, waterproof boots, first aid supplies, more batteries than seemed reasonable. Something urged me toward excessive preparation. I dismissed it as excitement, perhaps mixed with the natural caution that comes with age. At 29, I was no longer the reckless college student who once thought himself invincible. I understood the wilderness demanded respect. Sleep came fitfully that night. Rain lashed against my bedroom window as thunder rolled across the sky. I lay awake, listening to the storm's intensity, wondering if this was nature's warning, one I was too obtuse to heed. Friday morning arrived with eerie stillness. The storm had exhausted itself overnight, leaving behind a world drenched and glistening. I loaded my gear into my car and headed toward my friend's property, watching fog curl through valleys as I navigated winding country roads. Arriving at the meeting point felt oddly anticlimactic. My friends were already there, moving with unusual quietness as they transferred equipment to the four-wheelers. Our typical boisterous greetings were replaced by subdued nods and half-hearted smiles. I attributed this to the early hour and lingering drowsiness. "Strange weather," remarked one friend, glancing toward the tree line where mist clung to branches like ghostly fingers. "Forecast says it'll burn off by noon." We finished loading in near silence. 2 four-wheelers, each pulling a wagon laden with supplies. Tents, food, water, equipment. Everything secured with bungee cords that seemed inadequate for the journey ahead. Without discussion, we mounted up and began our trek into the forest. The first mile passed uneventfully. Muddy trails forced careful navigation, our vehicles occasionally sliding in saturated earth. The forest around us remained unnaturally quiet. No birdsong accompanied our journey. No rustling indicated wildlife retreating from our intrusion. Only the mechanical growl of engines disturbed the silence. "Is it always this quiet after a storm?" I called to my friend driving ahead. He shrugged without turning back. Animals probably seeking higher ground. That rain was something else. 2 miles in, we paused at a fallen tree blocking our planned route. While discussing alternative paths, I noticed how everyone's eyes kept darting toward the surrounding woods. The dense undergrowth created countless shadowed recesses where imagination could place unwelcome observers. "We should take the Eastern Fork," suggested our unofficial guide, pointing to a barely visible trail. "It's longer but passable. This tree isn't moving anytime soon." The detour led us deeper into unfamiliar territory. Branches hung lower here, scraping against shoulders and helmets. Visibility decreased as the canopy thickened overhead. Despite the morning hour, twilight conditions prevailed. 4 miles from our starting point, we reached a shallow creek crossing. Water rushed over smooth stones, higher than expected from the overnight downpour. As we carefully navigated across, I glimpsed movement on the opposite bank, something tall and thin withdrawing into dense foliage. "Did you see that?" I asked, pointing toward the spot. My friends followed my gesture but saw nothing. The moment passed, dismissed as a trick of light filtered through swaying branches. We continued onward. By midday, The predicted clearing of weather hadn't materialized. Instead, fog persisted, accompanied by a temperature drop that penetrated layers of clothing. Our progress slowed as trails deteriorated into nearly impassable mud pits. The journey, initially estimated at 2 hours, stretched into 4. No one suggested turning back. We reached the clearing shortly after 3 in the afternoon, though the forest's dim light made it feel much later. Our intended campsite had transformed into an island of relatively dry ground surrounded by sodden earth. Trees encircled the area completely, their highest branches intertwining to create a natural ceiling that would normally seem charming. Today, it felt confining. "We should get tents up before it gets any darker," someone suggested, breaking our collective trance. Activity dispelled some of the unease that had accumulated during our journey. We divided tasks efficiently, clearing ground, unpacking equipment, gathering firewood from the surrounding area. Working in pairs provided comfort against the oppressive silence that continued to dominate the forest. My partner and I ventured slightly beyond the clearing's edge to collect kindling. 50 yards from camp, we discovered an unusual arrangement of stones. Not quite a circle, more an irregular polygon, with each stone approximately the same size and partially embedded in soil. "Old campfire?" I suggested, though nothing about the formation resembled any fire pit I'd ever seen. "Maybe," my friend replied, clearly unconvinced. "Let's get back." Upon returning to camp, neither of us mentioned our discovery. The daylight continued its premature retreat as we worked to establish our temporary home. Tents rose along the clearing's perimeter, facing inward toward where our fire would burn. The arrangement felt instinctively defensive. As I secured my tent stakes, a sensation of being observed intensified. Repeatedly, I glanced over my shoulder, expecting to find someone or something at the forest's edge. Each time, I saw only trees, undergrowth, and deepening shadows. Yet the feeling persisted, growing stronger as afternoon surrendered to evening. "Fire's finally catching," announced our designated cook, drawing everyone's attention to the center of our encampment. Flames illuminated faces with flickering orange light, revealing expressions that mirrored my own discomfort. No one spoke of it directly, but our typical camping banter remained conspicuously absent. Instead, conversation focused exclusively on practicalities, meal preparation, sleeping arrangements, weather prospects. As darkness claimed the forest completely, our fire became an island of light in an ocean of impenetrable black. Beyond its radius, nothing remained visible. Sound, too, seemed altered by nightfall. The crack of burning wood echoed strangely, while voices felt muffled, as though the darkness itself absorbed our words. Dinner concluded without ceremony. We huddled closer to the flames, drawing what comfort we could from their warmth and light. No one suggested ghost stories or other traditional camping entertainment. Instead, we discussed watch rotations with unusual seriousness. 2-hour shifts, pairs of 2, proposed our most experienced outdoorsman. No one goes anywhere alone, not even to relieve themselves. No one questioned these precautions. No one asked what threat justified such vigilance. Some knowledge requires no articulation to be universally understood. My watch assignment came during the deepest hours, 2 to 4 a.m. I retreated to my tent around 10, hoping to accumulate enough rest before my shift. Inside the thin nylon walls, isolation intensified every sensation: the whispering rustle of trees outside, the occasional snap of twigs from indeterminate distances, the gradual diminishing of voices as others sought sleep. Rest proved impossible. I lay on my sleeping bag, fully clothed, including boots, staring at the tent ceiling where shadows from our diminishing fire performed unsettling dances. Time stretched elastically, minutes expanding into what felt like hours. At 1:45 a.m., a soft voice called my name from outside. My watch partner had arrived to collect me. I emerged into a drastically altered world. The fire had reduced to embers that cast minimal light. Cloud cover obscured stars and moon. The darkness pressed inward with tangible weight. "Anything happened during your shift?" I whispered to the friend I was relieving. "Nothing specific," came the careful reply. "But listen to the forest." I did, focusing beyond the immediate sounds of our camp. The absence struck me immediately. No insects chirping, no nocturnal birds calling, no small creatures moving through underbrush. Complete stillness prevailed, as though the entire ecosystem had evacuated, leaving only empty landscape behind. My watch partner and I positioned ourselves on opposite sides of the dying fire, facing outward toward the encroaching darkness. We maintained this arrangement for nearly an hour, speaking occasionally in hushed tones that seemed thunderous against the background silence. At approximately 3:10 a.m., the first distinct sound emerged from the forest's depths, a single sharp crack like a substantial branch breaking underfoot. Both our heads snapped toward the source, straining to penetrate darkness that remained absolute. Could be anything, my partner reasoned. Falling dead wood, deer. Neither of us believed these explanations. 10 minutes later, another sound, closer this time. A rustling movement, prolonged rather than instantaneous, suggesting deliberate progress through undergrowth. My hand found the heavy flashlight beside me, fingers tightening around its metal body. Should we wake the others? I breathed. Not yet. Could still be wildlife. The third sound eliminated all ambiguity. A low, sustained exhalation, distinctly breath-like but distorted somehow, as though passing through an unusual structure. It originated from the forest edge directly behind my tent, no more than 20 feet distant. My partner raised their flashlight, directing its beam toward the sound's origin. I mirrored the action. Twin beams cut through darkness to illuminate. Nothing. Empty space between tree trunks, undisturbed foliage, complete absence where presence had been unmistakably indicated. We maintained our lights on that spot for several minutes, neither speaking nor moving. Eventually, my partner whispered, "I'm waking everyone. Something's wrong here." Within minutes, our entire group huddled around the hastily replenished fire. No one questioned the decision to abandon sleep. No one suggested overreaction. Each face displayed the same recognition. We had intruded where we were not welcome. The remainder of the night passed in tense vigilance. Occasional sounds continued to emanate from the surrounding forest, always from different directions, always retreating before illumination could capture their source. We discussed departure, but concluded that attempting to navigate the treacherous trails in darkness presented greater danger than remaining until daylight. None of us acknowledged the most disturbing aspect of our situation, the sense that whatever circled our camp was not merely observing but evaluating, assessing, planning. First light arrived with excruciating slowness, gradient rather than decisive. Fog had returned overnight, shrouding the forest in diffuse gray that transformed solid objects into spectral approximations of themselves. Trees 30 feet distant appeared as vague silhouettes, their details lost in misty obscuration. Exhaustion had claimed most of my companions, who dozed in uncomfortable positions around the fire's remnants. I had remained wakeful, watching the darkness gradually dilute into murky half-light. With morning's arrival, I felt compelled to investigate our surroundings in daylight conditions, hoping rational observation might dispel night terrors. I woke my closest friend, explaining my intention to survey the campsite perimeter. Together, we ventured toward the forest edge, maintaining sight of our sleeping companions. The ground revealed immediate abnormalities, depressions in the soft earth surrounding our clearing, roughly oval in shape and approximately 18 inches in length. "These weren't here yesterday," my friend noted, crouching to examine one such impression, "and they're all around us." Indeed, similar depressions encircled our entire campsite at irregular intervals. Some appeared shallow, others pressed deep into mud. None resembled any animal track I recognized. Most disturbing was their arrangement, all facing inward toward our camp, as though something had stood at the forest's edge, observing from multiple positions throughout the night. Our examination continued beyond this initial discovery. 20 yards into the woods, we found tree bark stripped at approximately 7 feet above ground level, far higher than deer or other typical forest inhabitants could reach. The exposed wood appeared freshly damaged, with moisture still beading on its surface. "Could be bear activity," my friend suggested without conviction. Bears don't leave marks this precise, I countered, noting the methodical nature of the stripping. And they don't stand still to watch humans sleep. Further exploration revealed additional anomalies. A small stream running near our campsite contained several stones arranged in patterns inconsistent with natural water flow, deliberate placements forming crude geometric shapes. Nearby, we discovered an animal carcass, a medium-sized raccoon with wounds defying explanation. The creature appeared completely drained of blood, yet no significant external injuries were visible, except for 2 small punctures at the base of its skull. We returned to camp as others began stirring, sharing our discoveries in hushed conferences rather than group announcement. Unspoken consensus formed. We would depart immediately after breakfast, cutting our planned 2-night excursion to a single traumatic experience. Equipment failures happen, someone rationalized as we dismantled tents with unusual haste. Weather turns dangerous. No shame in adapting plans. These pretexts allowed us to maintain some facade of dignity. None admitted fleeing from threats we couldn't articulate or explain. None suggested supernatural intervention in what must surely have rational explanation. Yet our actions, the frantic packing, constant visual scanning of surroundings, rigid insistence on maintaining group proximity, betrayed our genuine understanding. Something had stalked our camp throughout the night. Something continued watching as we prepared for departure. Something waited for opportunities we were determined not to provide. Preparation for departure progressed with artificial normalcy. We consumed cold breakfast rations while systematically dismantling our brief occupation of the clearing. Conversation remained minimal, focused exclusively on immediate tasks. The persistent fog enhanced our isolation, creating the impression that our small group might be the last humans in existence. As I collapsed my tent, a distinct awareness crystallized. The forest's unnatural silence had evolved into something more insidious. Background sounds had returned, but with subtle wrongness. Bird calls lacked proper cadence, seeming mechanical rather than organic. Wind through branches produced tones that approximated whispers. The entire auditory landscape felt performative rather than genuine. "Does anyone else notice the sounds?" I asked, interrupting the methodical breakdown of camp. 5 faces turned toward me with expressions ranging from confusion to alarmed recognition. One friend cocked their head, listening intently before responding. "They don't match the birds," they observed. "The calls, they're not right for these species." Another added, "And they're not coming from the trees. They sound like they're coming from the ground." This observation, once articulated, became impossible to unhear. The mimicry of natural forest sounds originated from ground level rather than appropriate heights. Whatever produced these imitations lacked accurate understanding of the source material, creating approximate rather than precise replications. Our departure preparations accelerated to barely controlled panic. Equipment was secured haphazardly to the 4-wheelers and wagons. Personal belongings were abandoned, if not immediately accessible. The pretense of normal expedition conclusion evaporated entirely. As we prepared to mount our vehicles, one friend suddenly froze, staring intently at the ground near our extinguished fire pit. Wordlessly, he pointed toward an indentation in the ash-mixed soil. We gathered around the discovery, understanding its significance instantly. A footprint, if such inadequate terminology could apply. The impression measured nearly 20 inches in length, but with disturbing narrowness. No distinct toe markings appeared, only an elongated shape tapering to points at both ends. Most alarmingly, the impression's depth indicated enormous weight distribution along its unusual form. "That wasn't there earlier," someone whispered unnecessarily. "It's fresh," confirmed another. "The edges are still settling." This evidence of immediate proximity shattered remaining composure. We abandoned final preparations and mounted our vehicles with frantic urgency. Engines roared to life, shattering the forest's fabricated soundscape. As we prepared to depart, a final observation penetrated my awareness. The fog had developed structure inconsistent with natural meteorological patterns. Rather than uniform diffusion, it now presented concentrated cylindrical formations at regular intervals throughout the surrounding forest. These vertical fog columns held position despite air movement that should have dispersed them. Each maintained approximately human height, but with disproportionate thinness. Each remained absolutely motionless despite the engine vibrations disturbing nearby vegetation. Each appeared to be watching our departure. I said nothing of this observation, fearing verbalization might trigger collective hysteria. Instead, I focused on the immediate task, guiding my four-wheeler back along the treacherous trail toward safety. We formed a tight procession, abandoning single-file protocol in favor of close proximity that sacrificed maneuverability for perceived security. The journey outward commenced with desperate optimism that would prove tragically unfounded. Our escape began with mechanical determination, engines straining against mud that seemed substantially deeper than during our inward journey. The lead four-wheeler established our route, retracing original trails where possible despite deteriorated conditions. Fog continued to limit visibility to approximately 15 feet, transforming navigation into near-blind pursuit of the vehicle immediately ahead. Progress proved agonizingly slow. Twice within the first mile, wagons became mired in concealed depressions, requiring group effort to extract them. During these stops, the forest's artificial soundscape intensified, bird calls increasing in volume but decreasing in accuracy, creating cacophonous parody of natural ambiance. More disturbing were the glimpsed movements in peripheral vision, tall, thin shapes that retreated before direct observation could confirm their presence. These manifestations occurred with increasing frequency as our journey progressed, always maintaining distance that precluded clear identification. Halfway through our planned route, disaster struck. The lead four-wheeler's engine sputtered and died while crossing a shallow creek. Water had infiltrated critical components, rendering the vehicle temporarily inoperable. Basic repairs might restore function, but required time we instinctively understood was unavailable. We double up on the remaining four-wheeler, decided our most practical companion. Abandon non-essential equipment. We need to maintain movement. This solution required significant sacrifice. Personal gear, camping equipment, even food supplies were consolidated to absolute minimums. The remaining four-wheeler would carry all 6 of us, 3 on the vehicle itself, 3 precariously positioned on the attached wagon. Weight distribution became critical conversation rather than the looming threat motivating our desperate arrangements. As we completed these adjustments, I noticed the fog columns had reduced their perimeter. Where they had previously maintained substantial distance, they now formed a loose circle approximately 50 yards from our position. Their formation suggested coordinated rather than random distribution. Their presence implied intelligence governing their arrangement. "We need to move now," I urged, interrupting debate about optimal seating arrangements. "Right now." Something in my tone silenced further discussion. We mounted our overloaded vehicle without additional deliberation. The engine protested against excessive burden, but maintained operation as we resumed our retreat from the increasingly hostile environment. Progress degraded further under these compromised conditions. Our speed reduced to walking pace in many sections as the four-wheeler struggled against combined weight and adverse terrain. The fog thickened around us, limiting visibility to mere feet and forcing near-blind navigation. Most concerning, temperatures dropped precipitously despite midday timing, transforming exhaled breath into visible vapor. 3 miles from safety, we encountered our most significant obstacle, a massive tree fallen directly across our path, too substantial to circumvent through dense surrounding growth. This barrier had not existed during our inward journey, its fresh condition evident from still attached green leaves and unweathered exposed wood at the breakpoint. "Could the storm have weakened it?" someone suggested, voice quavering. Examination revealed the disturbing truth. This tree had not fallen naturally. Its trunk displayed clear evidence of deliberate damage. Deep gouges penetrated the wood in methodical patterns, weakening the structure until collapse became inevitable. These markings resembled those we had observed on standing trees near our campsite, but executed with greater intensity and purpose. "We go around," decided our driver. "Backtrack to the last fork and take the eastern path." This alternative would extend our journey significantly, but offered our only viable option. As we prepared to reverse direction, a sound penetrated the fog. rhythmic impacts suggesting bipedal movement, approaching rapidly from multiple directions. The noise surrounded our position completely, indicating coordinated convergence rather than random approach. "Get on now!" screamed our driver, gunning the engine before everyone had fully secured positions. We accelerated backward with dangerous speed, abandoning equipment that fell from our overloaded wagon. Bodies pressed together in desperate configuration as the four-wheeler fishtailed through mud. Multiple impacts against unseen obstacles threatened to overturn our vehicle, but somehow we maintained forward progress away from the blocked trail. The pursuing sounds maintained pace with our retreat, neither gaining nor losing distance despite our erratic movement. Their consistent rhythm suggested tireless pursuit, unburdened by terrain limitations that hampered our mechanical escape. Reaching the previous trail fork, we executed a hazardous turn onto the eastern path, a route none of us had previously traveled. This trail ascended sharply, climbing terrain features that challenged our overloaded vehicle's capabilities. The engine temperature gauge rose alarmingly as we forced continued progress up the incline. "It should connect with the logging road," gasped our navigator between violent jolts. "Half-mile ahead." Whether this assessment proved accurate, we never discovered. 200 yards along this unfamiliar path, we encountered evidence that froze my blood. Multiple trees marked with the same gouging patterns we had observed throughout our ordeal. These markings formed crude arrows pointing back toward our campsite, suggesting territorial boundaries deliberately indicated. We had not escaped the threat. We had penetrated deeper into its domain. What followed exists in my memory as fragmented impressions rather than coherent narrative. The four-wheeler engine screaming in protest as we reversed direction again. Bodies clinging to each other as the vehicle slid down muddy inclines at uncontrollable speed. Fog swirling around us in patterns that defied natural air movement, forming momentary apertures that revealed glimpses of something keeping pace alongside our desperate flight. "The main trail," someone shouted above mechanical noise. "We have to reach the main trail." This objective represented our only hope. The established path, wide enough for forestry vehicles, maintained sufficiently to permit rapid travel. If we could reach this artery, perhaps speed might accomplish what stealth and caution had failed to provide. Our driver abandoned caution entirely, pushing our vehicle beyond reasonable safety limitations. Twice we nearly overturned navigating sharp corners. Once the wagon briefly separated from its hitch before slamming back into connection. Throughout this chaotic retreat, the pursuing sounds maintained consistent proximity, neither closing the distance nor falling behind despite our increasingly reckless pace. Miraculously, we identified junction markings indicating the main trail's approach. Hope surged momentarily as we rounded a final bend to discover the wider path stretching before us. This triumph proved short-lived. Across the main trail, at regular intervals extending in both directions, stood the fog columns we had observed throughout our ordeal. No longer maintaining distance, they now formed an unmistakable blockade across our escape route. In daylight, their structure became horrifyingly apparent. These were not meteorological phenomena, but physical entities using atmospheric conditions as partial concealment. Their forms defied rational description. Proportions suggested vague humanoid configuration, but with impossible dimensions, height exceeding 7 feet, width narrower than anatomically viable, limbs articulated at joints inconsistent with mammalian structure. Their surfaces absorbed rather than reflected available light, creating void-like silhouettes against the forest backdrop. Most disturbing was their absolute stillness as our vehicle approached. No defensive posturing, no retreat from potential collision. They maintained position with complete confidence in their ability to halt our progress through means beyond physical interception. Our driver made the only possible decision. With wordless determination, he accelerated directly toward the center of their formation, aiming for the widest gap between entities. The four-wheeler's engine shrieked under strain as we charged the blockade at maximum achievable speed. The temperature plummeted as we entered their formation. Condensation instantly froze on exposed metal surfaces. Breath crystallized upon exhalation. Most alarmingly, the engine note changed, deepening, slowing, as though mechanical operations were being systematically impeded by proximity to these entities. We should have faltered there. By all rational expectation, our vehicle should have stalled within their formation, leaving us stranded among these impossible figures. What preserved our momentum remains unexplainable. Perhaps momentum itself, perhaps some limitation to their influence, perhaps intervention from forces I hesitate to name. The four-wheeler burst through their line with final desperate surge. Engine function normalized immediately upon clearing their proximity. Temperature gradually increased as distance grew between our position and their blockade. The pursuing sounds diminished for the first time since their commencement, suggesting territorial boundaries beyond which pursuit would not continue. We maintained maximum speed along the main trail, heedless of physical discomfort from overcrowding and violent motion. No one spoke. No one looked backward. Our collective focus narrowed exclusively to the path ahead and increasing distance from the nightmare behind. Civilization reappeared with shocking abruptness, first as maintained property boundaries, then as scattered rural structures, finally as the familiar driveway leading to my friend's property where our journey had begun mere hours earlier. We arrived with vehicle nearly depleted of fuel, bodies battered from rough passage, minds fragmented by experiences defying rational categorization. We unloaded in silence, each processing individual interpretations of our shared ordeal. Equipment transfers occurred mechanically, without discussion of items abandoned during our retreat. Departure arrangements manifested without explicit coordination, each person gravitating toward their vehicle with unspoken urgency to separate, to return to environments where natural laws maintained reliable governance. No collective debriefing occurred that day, nor in subsequent communications. References to our experience emerged obliquely in later conversations, always couched in ambiguous terminology that avoided direct acknowledgement. That weekend in September became our shorthand designation, requiring no additional specification. Months have passed since our encounter. I have researched historical documentation of the region, discovering disturbing patterns and disappearances dating back to early settlement periods. Local folklore contains veiled references to entities matching our observations, though described through metaphorical frameworks reflecting each era's cultural context. I write this account not expecting validation or explanation. I document these events because silence grants greater power to experiences that thrive in absence of articulation. Whatever we encountered in those woods continues its existence regardless of our witness. Its territorial boundaries remain unmarked on conventional maps, but are no less real for their official absence. I no longer venture into forests. I avoid locations where tree cover obstructs clear sightline to the horizon. I maintain lighting at night beyond reasonable necessity. These adaptations represent rational response to knowledge once gained cannot be unlearned. That wilderness contains more than ecological systems and natural predators. It contains watchers whose purposes remain their own. My flashlight cut through the pine-dark silence, and I caught a glimpse of something that shouldn't have been out there at that hour. It wasn't just the smeared footprints near a half-chewed backpack that worried me. It was the deep, ragged marks on the trunk of a centuries-old ponderosa, as though clawed by a twisted hand, driven by a savage intent. I had been on countless night searches, but none had ever made me feel so certain that I was about to cross a boundary I couldn't uncross. This happened to me back in 2011 in the San Juan National Forest of Colorado. I was 28 then, a search and rescue officer who prided himself on level-headed decisions and a calm approach to emergencies. My colleagues respected my ability to maintain composure when others panicked. I had a reputation for finding lost hikers when others gave up hope. The day had begun normally enough. I woke at dawn in my small cabin near the ranger station, made coffee, and reviewed weather reports. Mid-September in the mountains meant unpredictable conditions. Warm days could suddenly give way to frigid nights with little warning. I checked my equipment, as I did every morning, ensuring my pack contained fresh batteries, first aid supplies, water purification tablets, and emergency rations. By noon, I was at the station completing paperwork from our previous rescue, a family of 4 who had ventured too far from a designated campsite. Nothing dramatic, just tourists who had underestimated the vastness of the wilderness. I remember thinking it would be a quiet day. At 3:47 p.m., the call came in. A man named Brandon Ellis and his hiking companion Vincent Morales had failed to return to their campsite the previous evening. Their friends had waited until morning before reporting them missing, hoping they'd simply decided to extend their hike. The sheriff's dispatcher sounded unusually tense, mentioning that another camper had reported strange noises from the direction the men had headed. "Define strange," I said into the receiver. They wouldn't elaborate. Just said it wasn't wildlife. Made them pack up and leave before sunrise. I called in Ryan and Mark, two officers who had proven themselves reliable on difficult searches. Ryan was a former wilderness guide with an almost supernatural sense of direction. Mark, an ex-Army medic, could treat almost any injury with limited supplies. "What's your take?" Ryan asked as we loaded gear into our truck. "Another case of unprepared tourists?" "Maybe," I replied, checking our topographical maps. "But the sheriff called twice in 40 minutes. That's not typical." "Area has a history," Mark mentioned casually. "My grandmother used to tell stories about that section of forest. Said the old tribes avoided it." I rolled my eyes. "Let's stick to facts. 2 men, last seen heading toward Piedra Ridge. Their vehicle is still at the trailhead. They had supplies for a day hike, not an overnight." We drove in relative silence, the radio occasionally crackling with updates from dispatch. The sky darkened prematurely as clouds gathered, promising rain by nightfall. I felt an unusual heaviness in my chest as we parked by the trailhead. The forest seemed quieter than normal. No birdsong, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. Their red Jeep sat alone in the small gravel lot, covered in a thin film of dust. I ran my finger across the hood. Cold. They'd been gone at least a day. "Standard search pattern?" Mark asked, adjusting his pack. I nodded. "We'll follow the main trail to where it forks, then split up. Keep radio contact every 15 minutes. The forest enveloped us as we moved away from the trailhead. Pine trees stood like silent sentinels, their branches creating a dense canopy that filtered the waning daylight into ghostly patterns on the forest floor. The path was well marked initially, winding through stands of aspen whose leaves had just begun to turn golden. "Trail's clear," Ryan observed. "No signs of disturbance." I nodded, but something felt off. The forest was too still, as if holding its breath. Normally, these woods would be alive with sound. Chickadees calling, squirrels chattering, the soft rustling of deer moving through undergrowth. Instead, a profound silence pressed against us. "Anyone else notice how quiet it is?" Mark whispered, voicing my thoughts. Ryan stopped, cocking his head. "Yeah, not even wind in the branches." We continued, our boots crunching on the packed earth, the sound unnervingly loud in the hush. After about 2 miles, the trail forked. The left path descended toward the river, while the right climbed toward a ridge offering spectacular views of the valley. "Which way do you think they went?" Ryan asked. I studied the ground, searching for footprints or broken twigs. According to the report, they mentioned wanting to photograph the sunset from the ridge. "Right path it is," Mark confirmed. As we began our ascent, the trail narrowed and grew steeper. Roots from ancient trees created natural steps in some places, while in others, erosion had left loose stones that shifted treacherously underfoot. The forest grew denser, the massive pine trunks standing closer together, branches intertwining to block what little remaining daylight filtered down. I checked my watch. 6:32 p.m. We had perhaps an hour of usable light left. "We should consider setting up a base camp soon," I suggested. "Continue the search at first light." Ryan turned to me, his expression perplexed. "We've still got time. These guys could be injured, waiting for help." I hesitated, unable to articulate the growing sense of unease crawling up my spine. Something about this forest section felt wrong, like we were being observed. "Fine. We push on for another 30 minutes, then reassess." The path grew increasingly difficult to follow, branching into smaller game trails that wound confusingly through the undergrowth. I kept my eyes trained on the ground, searching for any sign of human passage. Then Mark called out, "Guys, over here!" He stood by a massive fallen log that bridged a small ravine. Kneeling, he pointed to something partially hidden beneath it. My heart rate quickened as I approached. A torn piece of fabric, bright blue, caught on a splintered branch. I recognized it immediately as the type used in high-quality hiking jackets. "Recent?" Ryan asked. I nodded. "Very. No weather damage. Colors still bright." I stood scanning the surrounding area with renewed focus. They came this way. We crossed the ravine using the fallen log as a bridge. The forest grew even darker on the other side, the trees older and more massive, their branches creating a cathedral-like canopy above us. The ground became softer, damper, covered in a thick carpet of decomposing pine needles that muffled our footsteps. I felt a cold drop hit my cheek and looked up. Rain had begun to fall, light at first, but quickly intensifying. Within minutes, we were trudging through a steady downpour that reduced visibility and turned the trail into slick mud. "We should turn back," Mark suggested, raising his voice over the drumming of rain on leaves. "This is getting dangerous." I was about to agree when Ryan pointed ahead. "Light!" I saw a light through the trees. We froze, straining to see through the curtain of rain. For a moment, nothing. Then, a brief flash, like a flashlight beam sweeping across the darkness. "Hello!" I called out, my voice echoing strangely through the trees. "Search and rescue! Is anyone there?" No response came, but the light appeared again, more distant now, moving away from us. "They're moving," Ryan said, already pushing forward. "We need to catch up." "Wait," I said, grabbing his arm. "Something's not right. Why wouldn't they respond?" But Ryan had already pulled away, hurrying through the rain toward the retreating light. Mark and I exchanged concerned glances before following. The rain intensified, becoming a deluge that soaked through our waterproof gear. Thunder rumbled overhead, followed by lightning that illuminated the forest in stark, momentary brilliance. In those flashes, the trees looked twisted and wrong, their branches reaching like grasping hands. We lost sight of Ryan briefly, then heard his shout from ahead. When we caught up, he stood motionless, staring at something on the ground. A backpack lay in the mud, its contents scattered. A broken camera, food wrappers, a torn map, all strewn across the wet earth. But what caught my attention were the marks around it. Deep impressions in the soft ground, too large for a human, too oddly spaced for any animal I recognized. "What made these?" Mark whispered, crouching to examine them. I had no answer. The prints were roughly foot-shaped but elongated, with what appeared to be claw marks at the ends. They led away from the backpack, deeper into the forest. "We need to radio this in," I decided, reaching for my device. Only static answered my call. The storm, or perhaps the dense forest itself, blocked transmission. As darkness fell completely, we reluctantly decided to make camp. None of us said it aloud, but we all felt it. We were being watched from the shadows beyond our flashlight beams. Something waited out there, beyond the boundary of light. I took first watch, sitting with my back against a massive tree trunk. Flashlight in one hand, knife in the other. The rain eventually subsided, leaving behind a thick mist that wound between the trees like spectral fingers. In the absolute darkness, I heard it first. A soft, deliberate sound. Not the random noises of the forest at night, but something methodical. Something circling our camp. Dawn broke reluctantly through the mist-shrouded trees, revealing a forest transformed by rain. Droplets clung to every needle and leaf, catching the weak sunlight like thousands of watching eyes. I had managed perhaps an hour of fitful sleep during Mark's watch. My dreams filled with shadowy figures moving just beyond my vision. "Did you hear anything during your watch?" I asked Mark as we packed up our soggy equipment. He hesitated, eyes darting to Ryan before answering. "Just the usual forest sounds." Ryan tossed his pack over his shoulder. "We should keep moving. Those hikers have been out here for at least 2 nights now." I nodded, though my instincts screamed to turn back, to leave this section of forest behind. Professional obligation won out over personal fear. We had a job to do. Using the scattered contents of the backpack as our starting point, we attempted to follow the strange tracks we'd discovered the previous night. The rain had partially obscured them, but enough remained visible to establish a direction, deeper into the forest, away from established trails. ID in the pack confirms it belonged to Brandon Ellis, Mark said, examining a soaked wallet. No sign of Vincent's belongings. The forest grew thicker as we advanced, the massive pines standing shoulder to shoulder like ancient guardians. Their lower branches had died and fallen away over the decades, creating an eerie colonnade of bare trunks supporting a distant ceiling of green. The ground was soft and springy with centuries of accumulated needles, making tracking difficult. "Look at this," Ryan called, kneeling beside a massive trunk. I approached, and my breath caught. Deep gouges marred the bark, starting about 7 feet up and raking downward in parallel lines. The exposed wood beneath appeared fresh, the tree's sap still oozing from the wounds. "Bear?" Mark suggested, though his tone conveyed doubt. I shook my head slowly. "Bears leave broader marks, and they usually scratch horizontally." I reached up, measuring the starting point against my height. Whatever made these stands taller than any of us. "Mountain lion?" Ryan offered. "Maybe." But I didn't believe it. The spacing was wrong, the pattern unnatural. We continued our advance in silence, each lost in contemplation of what might have created those marks. The mist clung stubbornly to the forest floor, turning familiar shapes into looming specters that dissolved upon approach. Around mid-morning, we found the first truly disturbing evidence. A single hiking boot lay in a small clearing, its leather torn and shredded, as if by tremendous force. Nearby, a sock still containing what appeared to be broken toes. Mark turned away, swallowing hard, Ryan's face drained of color. I knelt beside the grisly find, forcing myself to analyze it professionally. "Recent," I murmured. "No significant decomposition." "Are we looking at predator activity?" Ryan managed, his voice strained. I examined the boot more closely. The damage pattern was unlike anything I'd seen before. Not the crushing force of a bear's jaws or the slicing precision of feline teeth. This looked as if the boot had been gripped and physically torn apart by something with immense strength. "We need to radio in again," I decided, pulling out my device. To my surprise, it connected this time, though the signal was weak and filled with static. I reported our position and findings, requesting additional search teams and possibly armed Forest Service personnel. "Copy that," the dispatcher's voice crackled through. "Be advised, weather system moving in. Expect heavy precipitation by late afternoon. Additional teams approximately 3 hours out." The communication cut off abruptly, leaving us alone once more with our discovery. 3 hours, Mark repeated. Should we wait for backup? I considered our options. Standard protocol in a situation like this, evidence of potential violence or predator attack, would be to secure the area and wait for additional resources. But 2 men remained missing, possibly injured. Every hour decreased their chances of survival. We continue, I decided, but we stay together. No splitting up under any circumstances. We marked the location of our find with bright orange surveyor's tape and pressed onward. The forest seemed to close in around us, the spaces between trees narrowing, forcing us to wind through increasingly tight passages. The ground began to slope downward into a shallow ravine. The smell hit us first, a sickly sweet odor of decay mixed with something musky and animal. Ryan gagged, pulling his shirt over his nose. "What is that?" he choked out. We found the source moments later. A deer carcass lay in the center of the ravine, but not killed and partially consumed as one would expect from normal predator behavior. This animal had been arranged. Its limbs had been positioned unnaturally, splayed outward from its body. Parts of its hide had been systematically removed in long strips and hung from surrounding branches like grotesque decorations. "This isn't normal predator behavior," Mark whispered, his medical training apparently forgotten as he stared at the macabre display. "No," I agreed, fighting to keep my voice steady. "It's not." What disturbed me most wasn't the killing itself. Nature could be brutal, but the deliberate, almost ritualistic quality of the arrangement. This suggested intelligence, purpose, something beyond mere animal instinct. "We should leave," Ryan said suddenly. "Right now." For the first time in my career, I found myself seriously considering abandoning a search. Everything about this situation felt wrong. The unnatural silence of the forest, the strange tracks, the deliberate display before us. My training warred with primal instinct. Then we heard it, a faint call for help echoing through the trees. "Hello?" The voice was weak, distant. "Is someone there? Please, help!" Our eyes met. Decision made in an instant. We scrambled up the ravine's far side, moving toward the voice. The terrain became increasingly difficult, with fallen trees and dense underbrush blocking our path. We called out repeatedly, receiving increasingly urgent responses. "I'm here! Oh God, please hurry!" We finally broke through into a small clearing dominated by a massive boulder. Huddled against its base was a man, filthy, bloodied, his clothes torn to shreds. His eyes were wild with terror, darting constantly to the surrounding trees. "Vincent." I approached slowly, hands raised to appear non-threatening. He nodded frantically, tears cutting tracks through the dirt on his face. "It took Brandon. It took him last night. I heard him screaming." Mark immediately went into medic mode, checking the man for injuries while Ryan and I secured the perimeter of the clearing. Vincent had multiple lacerations across his arms and torso, as if he'd been clawed, but none appeared life-threatening. "Vincent, what happened?" I asked gently, crouching beside him. His eyes wouldn't focus, constantly shifting to the forest around us. "We were setting up camp when we heard something moving around us. Brandon thought it was a bear, so we tried to make noise to scare it off." He swallowed hard. "It laughed, like it found us amusing." A chill ran through me. "What do you mean it laughed?" "Not like a person. More like it was imitating laughter it had heard. Then it started calling us, using our names." His voice broke. "It knew our names." Mark shot me a concerned look over Vincent's head. Possible delirium from exposure or trauma. "We ran," Vincent continued. "Tried to get back to the trail, but it was too dark, and it seemed like the trees had moved. Nothing looked familiar." He gripped my arm suddenly, his fingers digging in with surprising strength. "It hunted us, for hours, toying with us. Brandon tripped, and I just kept running. I heard him screaming for so long." I gently disengaged his grip. "We're going to get you out of here, Vincent. Our colleagues are on their way. Can you walk?" He nodded weakly, attempting to stand with Mark's assistance. As Ryan helped them, I moved to the edge of the clearing, scanning the surrounding forest. The mist had thickened again, swirling between trunks in hypnotic patterns. Something about the quality of light had changed. The day should have been brightening, but instead, a premature twilight seemed to be settling among the trees. We needed to move quickly. If Vincent's friend was still alive somewhere in these woods, our window for finding him was rapidly closing. If not, we needed to get Vincent and ourselves to safety before whatever had attacked them returned. "Let's head back the way we came," I decided. "Mark, can he make it?" Mark nodded. "He's dehydrated and exhausted, but his injuries are superficial. We can make it." We began our retreat, moving as quickly as Vincent's condition allowed. I took point, Ryan brought up the rear, and Mark supported Vincent between us. The forest seemed different somehow, the path we'd broken on our way and less distinct than it should have been. "Recognize any of this?" Ryan asked after 30 minutes of silent trudging. I hesitated. We should have reached the ravine with the deer carcass by now, but there was no sign of it. The trees looked unfamiliar, older and more gnarled than those we'd passed earlier. Vincent noticed our confusion. "It's happening again," he whispered. "The forest. It changes." "That's not possible," Mark said firmly. "We're just turned around. The compass will get us back." I pulled out my compass and felt my stomach drop. The needle spun freely, unable to find north. I tapped it, shook it, but the result remained the same. "Electronic interference, maybe?" Ryan suggested, pulling out his own compass. Same result. Vincent laughed, a high-pitched sound verging on hysteria. It won't let you leave, not until it's ready. Get a grip, Mark snapped, then softened his tone. We'll find our way out. We always do. I checked my watch. 2:17 p.m. The additional search teams should be entering the area soon. I tried the radio again, but received only static in response. As we debated our next move, a blood-curdling scream tore through the forest. Raw, agonized, human. It came from somewhere ahead of us, cutting off abruptly, mid-crescendo. Vincent collapsed to his knees. "Brandon," he whispered. Without discussion, we moved toward the sound, helping Vincent along as best we could. The forest grew darker with each step, the canopy thickening overhead until only occasional shafts of light penetrated to the forest floor. The mist coalesced into writhing shapes that seemed almost purposeful in their movements. The smell hit us again, decay and musk, stronger this time. We crested a small rise and stopped abruptly. Below us lay a small hollow surrounded by massive ancient pines. Their trunks were marked with the same deep gouges we'd seen earlier, but far more numerous, as if the entire grove had been used as a scratching post by something immense. The ground was disturbed, showing signs of a violent struggle. Dark stains that could only be blood spattered the lower trunks and undergrowth. And in the center of it all, a man lay motionless. Even from a distance, I could tell it was too late for Brandon Ellis. His body was contorted unnaturally, limbs bent at impossible angles. Large portions of his clothing had been torn away, exposing skin marked with deep, parallel lacerations. Vincent made a sound somewhere between a sob and a scream. Mark held him back as Ryan and I cautiously approached the body. "My God," Ryan whispered as we drew closer. Brandon's face was frozen in an expression of absolute terror, eyes wide and staring at something only he had seen. The wounds covering his body showed no signs of feeding behavior. This wasn't a predator killing for food. This was something else entirely. I knelt beside the body, forcing my professional training to override my horror. "Recent," I murmured. "Within the last hour, I'd guess." "Look at the spacing of these wounds," Ryan said, pointing to a set of parallel gashes across the victim's chest. "Those aren't from any animal I recognize." I stood, scanning our surroundings with renewed vigilance. Whatever had done this could still be nearby. The hollow felt wrong, too quiet, too still. The mist seemed thicker here, curling around the ancient trunks like pale fingers. "We need to go," I said, keeping my voice low. "Right now." As if in response, a branch snapped somewhere in the forest behind us. We whirled toward the sound, flashlights cutting through the gloom despite the daylight hour. Nothing visible, just endless trees fading into misty darkness. Another snap, closer this time, followed by a soft rustling of underbrush. "Move," I ordered, abandoning protocol. We couldn't secure the body, couldn't properly document the scene. Survival took precedence. We retreated up the rise, half carrying Vincent between us. As we crested the top, I risked a glance back into the hollow. A figure stood beside Brandon's body, tall, impossibly thin, with limbs that seemed too long for its frame. It was partially obscured by mist, but I could make out a narrow head atop a long neck, and arms that nearly reached the ground. It remained motionless, as if watching us, though I couldn't make out any features that might be a face. "Run!" I whispered, then louder. "Run!" We crashed through the underbrush, all pretense of careful navigation abandoned. Vincent found renewed strength and terror, keeping pace between Mark and Ryan. I brought up the rear, constantly looking back, expecting to see that elongated form pursuing us. The forest blurred around us, trees seeming to lean inward as we passed, branches reaching like grasping hands. The light grew dimmer with each passing minute, though my watch showed only mid-afternoon. After what felt like hours, but might have been only 20 minutes, we stumbled into a familiar setting, the ravine with the deer carcass. Relief flooded through me at this confirmation we were on the right track. "We're heading the right way," I gasped. "The trailhead should be about 2 miles from here." Vincent collapsed, shaking uncontrollably. "It's letting us think we're escaping," he muttered. "It's playing with us." Mark pulled him upright. "Stay with us, Vincent. We're getting out." As if contradicting his statement, the first heavy drops of rain began to fall. The storm predicted by the dispatcher had arrived, accompanied by distant thunder. Within minutes, we were trudging through another downpour, visibility reduced to mere feet. "Keep together!" I shouted over the roar of rain. "Hold on to each other!" We formed a human chain, Mark leading with Vincent behind him, followed by Ryan, with me bringing up the rear. The going was treacherous, the forest floor turning to slick mud beneath our boots. Twice Vincent nearly fell, saved only by Mark's firm grip. Lightning flashed overhead, momentarily turning the forest into a stark black and white photograph. In that instant, I saw it again. The elongated figure standing among the trees perhaps 50 yards behind us, perfectly still despite the raging storm. Then, darkness returned, and when the next lightning flash came, the space was empty. "It's behind us!" I shouted, pushing the others forward with renewed urgency. We abandoned all caution, practically dragging Vincent as we splashed through deepening puddles and scrambled over fallen logs. The rain hammered down mercilessly, turning small depressions into miniature ponds and gentle slopes into treacherous slides. A tremendous crash sounded behind us, a falling tree or large branch. None of us looked back to confirm. Finally, blessedly, we spotted the orange surveyor's tape we'd left earlier marking the location of the shredded boot. We were on the right path, heading toward the trailhead. Hope surged through me, providing a second wind. The rain began to slacken, visibility improving incrementally. We maintained our pace, though my lungs burned and my legs trembled with exhaustion. Vincent had gone completely silent, moving mechanically, eyes vacant. "Almost there," Mark gasped encouragingly. "Just a little further." We broke through a stand of younger pines and found ourselves on the main trail, the wide, well-maintained path that would lead us back to civilization. In the distance, I could make out the flashing lights of vehicles at the trailhead. "They're here!" Ryan shouted. "The backup team's made it!" We staggered forward, waving our arms and shouting to attract attention. Flashlight beams cut through the gloom as Forest Service personnel moved toward us along the trail. As they reached us, Vincent collapsed entirely, unconscious from exhaustion and trauma. Mark immediately began briefing the medics who rushed to attend him. Ryan sank to his knees in the mud, relief evident in every line of his body. I remained standing, staring back into the forest we'd just escaped. Through the curtain of lessening rain, I thought I could make out a slender form watching from between distant trunks, motionless, patient, waiting. The subsequent hours passed in a blur of debriefings, medical examinations, and growing disbelief from the Forest Service officials who interviewed us. By nightfall, Vincent had been transported to the regional hospital, still drifting in and out of consciousness. Mark, Ryan, and I sat in the ranger station, nursing cups of bitter coffee as we repeatedly recounted our experience. "Let me get this straight," Ranger Supervisor Dawson said, rubbing his temples. "You're claiming some unidentified creature killed Brandon Ellis and terrorized his friend?" I chose my words carefully. "I'm saying we encountered something in that section of forest that I can't explain. The evidence at the scene showed signs of extraordinary violence not consistent with known predator behavior." "Mountain lion attacks can be brutal," Dawson countered, "especially if the victim fought back." Ryan leaned forward. "This wasn't a mountain lion. The spacing of the wounds, the height of the marks on the trees, it doesn't match." Dawson sighed heavily. "I've got a dead hiker, a traumatized survivor, and 3 of my best search and rescue officers talking about some kind of forest monster. The county sheriff is breathing down my neck, and I've got reporters calling every 5 minutes. We can only report what we saw," Mark said quietly. "And what exactly did you see?" Dawson pressed. "Because so far, all I'm hearing is about unusual tracks and claw marks. Did any of you actually see this thing clearly?" I hesitated, recalling the glimpses I'd caught through mist and rain, a tall, elongated figure with impossibly long limbs, but always at a distance, always partially obscured. Had I truly seen what I thought I had, or had fear and exhaustion played tricks on my perception? "We saw something," I admitted. "But no, not clearly enough to describe in detail." Dawson nodded, as if that confirmed his suspicions. "Listen, I believe you encountered something out there, but the simplest explanation is usually the right one. We've had reports of a particularly large mountain lion in that area. Add in poor visibility, stress, and the suggestive power of finding a mutilated body. Well, the human mind fills in the blanks. I wanted to argue, but found myself too exhausted to push back. Maybe he was right. Maybe we had encountered a mountain lion with unusual hunting patterns, and our minds had transformed it into something more sinister. "What about the recovery team?" Ryan asked. "Have they found Brandon's body yet?" A shadow crossed Dawson's face. "That's the other issue. The team reached the coordinates you provided, but there was no body." Silence fell over the room. "That's impossible," Mark said finally. "We marked the location clearly." "The team found your markers," Dawson confirmed. "They found blood evidence and signs of a struggle, but no body. They're still searching, but with night falling and another storm system moving in." I struggled to process this information. We had seen Brandon Ellis lying dead in that hollow, his body mutilated beyond any possibility of survival. How could it simply be gone? "The coordinates might have been off," Dawson suggested gently. "GPS isn't always reliable under heavy canopy." But I knew our location had been correct, which meant something or someone had moved Brandon's body after we fled. Dawson stood, stretching his back. "Get some rest, all of you. We'll resume the search at first light, weather permitting. I've got temporary accommodation set up for you in the auxiliary building." As he left, Ryan looked at me, his expression haunted. "You don't think it was a mountain lion any more than I do?" "No," I admitted. "But what's the alternative? That some unknown creature is stalking that section of forest? That it has intelligence enough to... what? Play with its victims? Remove evidence?" Mark shook his head slowly. "Whatever it was, we got lucky. Vincent got lucky. We need to focus on that." We eventually retreated to the cots that had been prepared for us, though I doubted any of us would find meaningful rest. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that elongated figure standing motionless among the trees, watching us flee. The forest itself seemed to have conspired against us, changing around us, leading us in circles until we stumbled upon Brandon's body. Had that been intentional? Had we been meant to find him? I must have dozed off eventually, because I awoke with a start to find morning light filtering through the blinds. My watch showed 6:43 a.m. I had slept nearly 7 hours, though my body felt as if I hadn't rested at all. Ryan and Mark were already up, looking equally exhausted. We ate a quick breakfast in silence before rejoining Ranger Dawson in the main office. "Weather's cleared," he announced without preamble. "Recovery team is heading out in 30 minutes. I'd like you three to accompany them, help pinpoint the exact location." I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach at the thought of returning to that forest. Judging by their expressions, Mark and Ryan shared my reluctance. "Is that necessary?" Mark asked. "We provided detailed coordinates." "Necessary? No? Helpful?" "Absolutely." Dawson's tone left little room for argument. "Besides, I thought you'd want closure on this." He was right, of course. Professional pride, if nothing else, demanded that we see this through. We couldn't simply walk away from the most disturbing search operation of our careers. The recovery team consisted of 6 Forest Service personnel, all armed with rifles. A precaution against the mountain lion Dawson had decided was responsible. As we loaded into the vehicles, I noted the additional equipment they carried: body bags, evidence collection kits, cameras. The drive to the trailhead passed in tense silence. The forest looked different in the clear morning light, less menacing, more mundane. Birds called from the canopy and small animals scurried through the underbrush. Nothing suggested the horrors we had witnessed the previous day. "Hard to believe this is the same place," Ryan murmured as we began our hike along the main trail. I nodded. In daylight, without rain and mist obscuring our vision, the forest appeared as it should, a natural ecosystem, neither malevolent nor sentient. Had we truly experienced what I remembered, or had exhaustion and stress warped our perceptions? We reached the fork in the trail and turned right, following the path toward the ridge. Everything matched my recollection perfectly. The root steps, the erosion patterns, the massive pines growing increasingly dense. We passed the fallen log where we'd found the first piece of torn fabric, now marked with additional surveyor's tape from the previous day's search. "So far, so normal," Mark commented, though his hand rested on his holstered sidearm. The Forest Service team moved with professional efficiency, maintaining proper spacing while keeping sightlines open. Their presence was reassuring, their rifles even more so. We reached the location where we'd found the shredded boot. It remained undisturbed from the previous day, sealed now in an evidence bag by one of the team members. From there, we continued to the ravine containing the deer carcass, except it wasn't there. We stood at the edge of the ravine, staring down at empty space. No arranged deer remains, no strips of hide hanging from branches, just ordinary forest floor, undisturbed except for our own footprints from the day before. "You're sure this is the right place?" one of the team members asked. "Positive," I replied, pointing to our clearly visible tracks in the still damp earth. "We came through here yesterday afternoon." The team leader, a stoic woman named Rivera, frowned. Animals might have dragged the remains away, coyotes, scavengers. It was a reasonable explanation, but it didn't account for the complete absence of blood evidence or scattered bones. The display we had witnessed had been elaborate and extensive. There should have been some trace remaining. We pressed on toward the hollow where we had found Brandon's body. The forest remained eerily normal, birds singing, squirrels chattering, sunlight dappling the forest floor through gaps in the canopy. None of the oppressive silence or unnatural darkness we had experienced before. "This isn't right," Ryan whispered to me as we walked. "It's like it's hiding." I understood exactly what he meant. The forest felt like an elaborate set, a carefully constructed facade of normality concealing something much darker beneath. We reached the rise overlooking the hollow around midday. The Forest Service team spread out along the crest, scanning the area below with binoculars before proceeding. "Clear," Rivera announced after a thorough survey. "Let's move in. Maintain formation." We descended into the hollow, which looked nothing like I remembered. The massive ancient pines still surrounded it, but their trunks showed no signs of the deep gouges we had seen. The ground appeared undisturbed, no signs of struggle, no bloodstains, no body. "This can't be right," Mark insisted, turning in a slow circle. "The body was right here, right in the center." Rivera gestured to two of her team. "Full sweep, 5-meter grid pattern. Look for any evidence, blood, tissue, personal effects." They began their methodical search while the rest of us stood in bewildered silence. I checked my GPS unit, confirming that we were indeed at the exact coordinates we had reported. "Could the rain have washed away the evidence?" one team member suggested. "Not all of it," I replied. "There was too much blood, too much disturbance, and it doesn't explain the absence of claw marks on the trees." Ryan had wandered to the edge of the hollow, examining one of the massive pines. "Look at this," he called. We gathered around him. The trunk appeared normal at first glance, but upon closer inspection, I could see faint vertical striations in the bark, as if the deep gouges we had witnessed had somehow healed or been covered over. "What would cause that?" Mark asked, running his fingers over the strange patterns. Rivera shook her head. "I've never seen anything like it." The search continued for another hour, yielding nothing. No blood evidence, no signs of violence, no trace of Brandon Ellis. It was as if the events we had witnessed had never occurred, or had been deliberately erased. "I don't understand," Ryan said as we regrouped. "We all saw it. Vincent saw it." "Speaking of Vincent," Mark interjected, "has anyone checked on his condition this morning?" Rivera nodded. "He's stable but sedated. Doctors are concerned about his psychological state. He keeps insisting it won't let them find Brandon." A chill ran through me at those words. They echoed my own unspoken fear, that whatever had killed Brandon had some purpose in mind, some reason for taking his body. "We should head back," Rivera decided eventually. "We'll report this as inconclusive. Maybe the sheriff's department can bring in cadaver dogs tomorrow." As we prepared to leave, I felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to share what I had truly seen. The elongated figure watching us from the trees, the way the forest had seemed to shift around us, Vincent's insistence that it was playing with us. but I remained silent. Without evidence, my account would sound like the ravings of a traumatized mind. We began our ascent out of the hollow. I lingered at the rear of the group, taking one last look at the scene of such horror that now appeared so ordinary. Movement caught my eye, subtle, almost imperceptible. A slight shifting of shadows between distant trunks, too deliberate to be wind or animal. I froze, staring at the spot. For a moment, nothing. Then, a figure stepped partially from behind a massive pine, tall and thin, limbs hanging unnaturally long at its sides. It made no attempt to hide, standing motionless, observing me from perhaps 100 yards away. "Hey!" I shouted, pointing. "Over there!" The entire team whirled, rifles raised. Rivera brought binoculars to her eyes, scanning the area I indicated. "I don't see anything," she said after a moment. I looked back. The figure was gone, the space between the trees empty once more. "It was there," I insisted. "Just for a moment." Rivera lowered her binoculars, her expression a careful neutral. The mind plays tricks after trauma, happens to the best of us. I wanted to argue but realized the futility. Without others witnessing what I had seen, my testimony alone wouldn't be enough to convince them. We resumed our trek back toward the trailhead, moving at a brisk pace despite the terrain. I continually glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see that elongated form following us through the trees. But the forest remained peaceful, showing no signs of the horror it had contained the previous day. As we approached the main trail, Ryan fell into step beside me. "You saw it again, didn't you?" he asked quietly. I nodded, relieved that someone believed me. "Just for a moment, watching us." "I've been seeing glimpses too," he admitted. "Quick movements at the edge of my vision. But every time I turn to look directly, there's nothing there." Rivera thinks we're suffering from some kind of stress reaction. Maybe we are. Ryan glanced into the dense forest to our right. Or maybe it's only letting us see it when it wants to be seen. The implications of that statement haunted me for the remainder of our journey. The idea that we were dealing with something intelligent enough to selectively reveal itself, to clean up evidence of its existence, to play elaborate psychological games with its victims. It defied everything I understood about the natural world. We reached the trailhead by mid-afternoon, the bright sunlight and open space providing a welcome respite from the claustrophobic forest. As the team loaded equipment into vehicles, Dawson approached us. "No sign of the body?" he asked, though he clearly knew the answer already. "Nothing," Rivera confirmed. "No blood evidence, no signs of struggle, just normal forest." Dawson sighed heavily. "I'll notify the sheriff. They'll want to bring in their own search teams, possibly with dogs." "They won't find anything," I said with quiet certainty. He gave me a long, evaluating look. "You really believe something supernatural happened out there, don't you?" I considered my response carefully. "I believe we encountered something that doesn't fit our understanding of local wildlife. Whether that makes it supernatural or just previously undocumented, I can't say. Well, documented or not, I'm closing that section of forest to the public pending a full investigation." Dawson ran a hand through his thinning hair. "You three are on administrative leave until further notice. Get some rest, see the department psychologist if needed." As we drove away from the trailhead, I looked back at the wall of pines marking the forest's edge. In the broad daylight, it appeared completely ordinary, just trees and underbrush, part of the natural world. But I knew better now. Something waited in those depths, something patient and intelligent. And as the forest receded in the distance, I couldn't shake the feeling that our encounter with it was far from over. 3 days passed. I spent them in my cabin, alternating between bouts of restless sleep and periods of intense hypervigilance. Every creaking floorboard, every rustling leaf outside my window sent my heart racing. I kept the lights on at night, a loaded shotgun propped beside my bed. On the 4th day, Ryan called. "They're saying Vincent disappeared from the hospital last night," he said without preamble. I sat upright, instantly alert. "What do you mean, disappeared?" "Walked out of his room around 3 a.m. Security cameras show him exiting the building, but there's no footage of where he went after that. His room was on the 2nd floor, and he was still on IV antibiotics. Doctors say he shouldn't have been physically capable of leaving on his own." A chill spread through me. He went back to the forest, didn't he? Ryan's silence was answer enough. Have they organized a search party? I asked, already knowing what I had to do. They're assembling one now. Dawson called to say we're still on administrative leave and explicitly instructed us not to participate. I began gathering equipment even as we spoke. Flashlight, compass, first aid kit, water, protein bars, knife. When have you known me to follow instructions that might get someone killed? Ryan's laugh held no humor. I figured you'd say that. Mark and I are already gearing up. Meet at my place in 30? I'll be there. I hung up and continued my preparations, moving with the methodical efficiency that had become second nature over years of search and rescue work. But this time was different. This time, I knew what waited in the forest. Or at least, I had glimpsed enough to understand how dangerous it truly was. I arrived at Ryan's small ranch house to find him and Mark already loading equipment into Ryan's Jeep. Both looked as exhausted as I felt, with dark circles under their eyes and a tense alertness to their movements. You look terrible, Mark greeted me. Speak for yourself, I replied, tossing my pack into the vehicle. Have you even slept since we got back? Tried. Didn't work out. He gestured to the shotgun secured to my pack. I see we had the same idea. Ryan and Mark had both brought firearms as well. Ryan a hunting rifle, Mark a revolver he normally kept locked in his gun safe. Are we really doing this? Ryan asked as we climbed into the Jeep. Going against direct orders, potentially endangering ourselves to look for a man who might have walked into the forest specifically to die? I met his eyes in the rearview mirror. You're here, aren't you? He nodded grimly and started the engine. We drove in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the road, the light fading earlier than it should have as clouds gathered on the horizon. Another storm approaching, just what we needed. How are we playing this? Mark asked eventually. Official search party will be at the main trailhead. We can't just walk in beside them. There's a fire road about 2 miles south, I suggested. Less used, but it'll get us close enough. We can cut through to where we found Vincent originally. Ryan nodded. I know the one. Might be muddy after all the rain, but the Jeep can handle it. We diverted onto the smaller access road, which quickly deteriorated from gravel to rutted dirt. The Jeep bounced and slid, but Ryan navigated the challenging terrain with practiced skill. After about 20 minutes, we reached a small clearing that served as an unofficial parking area for local hunters. No other vehicles were present. The official search would be concentrated miles away at the main trailhead. We were on our own. Full gear, I instructed as we exited the vehicle. Radios on Channel 3. Official search will be using 1 and 2. Test your flashlights now and keep weapons accessible but safe. We performed equipment checks with practiced efficiency, then gathered for a final strategy session. Most likely scenario, I began. Vincent returned to where we found Brandon's body. That hollow is our primary target. We move together, no splitting up under any circumstances. If anyone sees or hears anything unusual, we stop immediately and evaluate. Questions? Yeah, Mark said, checking his revolver one last time. What if we find what took Brandon? What's the plan then? I had no good answer. We were search and rescue, not hunters or soldiers. Our training prepared us to find lost hikers, not to confront unknown predators of potentially supernatural origin. We prioritize finding Vincent and getting out, I decided. We don't engage unless absolutely necessary to protect ourselves or him. Ryan and Mark nodded, though I could see the same doubt in their eyes that I felt myself. We were venturing into danger with no real plan beyond hope and desperation. We entered the forest as the day began its transition to evening, the canopy above immediately reducing the available light. The trees seemed to close in around us, branches reaching overhead to block out the sky. Despite the different entry point, I recognized the sensation immediately. That feeling of crossing a boundary into somewhere other. The forest grew quieter with each step we took, the normal sounds of wildlife fading until only our footfalls and breathing remained. The air felt heavier, thicker, as if we were walking through invisible cobwebs that clung to our skin. Anyone else notice the birds stopped singing? Mark whispered, after we'd been walking for perhaps 20 minutes. Ryan nodded, eyes constantly scanning the surrounding trees. Just like before. We continued in silence, navigating by compass and GPS toward the coordinates of the hollow where we had found Brandon's body. The going was slow, the terrain unfamiliar from this approach. Twice we had to detour around dense thickets that seemed impenetrable. Does it seem like we're being herded? Ryan asked after the second detour. I had been thinking the same thing. The forest didn't appear to be changing around us as Vincent had described, but the path of least resistance consistently led us in a particular direction. Not directly toward our target coordinates, but slightly east. Let's try to push straight through, I decided, pointing at a stand of younger pines that, while dense, should have been passable. We attempted to force our way through, but the branches seemed to interlock more tightly the harder we pushed. Thorny undergrowth tearing at our clothing and skin. After struggling for several minutes and gaining only a few feet, we admitted defeat. This is impossible, Mark panted, extracting a thorn from his forearm. It's like the forest itself is against us. So we follow the path it's giving us, I said, making a quick decision. But we stay alert. This could be leading us into a trap. We resumed our journey along the more accessible route, constantly checking our GPS to ensure we weren't being led too far astray. The light continued to fade more rapidly than it should have, forcing us to activate our flashlights despite it being only late afternoon according to my watch. The first raindrops hit about an hour into our trek, fat, cold drops that quickly intensified into a steady downpour. We donned rain gear, but the forest floor soon turned to mud, making each step treacherous. Just like last time, Ryan observed grimly. Storm comes right when we're deepest in. Thunder rumbled overhead, followed seconds later by lightning that briefly illuminated the forest in stark relief. In that momentary flash, I caught sight of something that made my blood run cold. A tall, thin figure standing among distant trees, watching our progress. Did you see that? I hissed, pointing. Mark and Ryan both nodded, faces taut with fear and determination. It's tracking us, Mark whispered. Has been since we entered. Keep moving, I decided. We find Vincent and get out. That's all that matters now. We pressed on through the worsening storm, the path growing increasingly difficult to navigate. Mud sucked at our boots, hidden roots threatened to trip us, and low branches whipped our faces as we pushed through. Despite these obstacles, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being allowed to proceed, that our journey was being observed with almost scientific curiosity. After another hour of grueling progress, we emerged into a small clearing that stopped us in our tracks. In the center stood a crude structure assembled from broken branches and what appeared to be strips of cloth, some kind of primitive shelter or monument. It rose perhaps 7 feet tall, vaguely conical in shape, with objects hanging from its frame that swayed in the wind. What the hell is that? Ryan breathed, raising his rifle slightly. I approached cautiously, flashlight beam revealing disturbing details. The strips of cloth were torn clothing. I recognized fragments of hiking gear, including what might have been pieces of Brandon's jacket. Other items hung among them. A broken watch, a shredded boot similar to the one we'd found days earlier, a crushed pair of eyeglasses. Trophies, Mark suggested, his voice tight, like a hunter's display. But what truly chilled me were the marks carved into each branch of the structure. Not random scratches, but deliberate patterns that repeated. Not letters or numbers I recognized, but too regular to be meaningless. It's communicating, I realized aloud. Or trying to. Ryan snorted nervously. What's it saying? Dinner is served? A branch snapped loudly in the forest behind us. We whirled, weapons raised, flashlights cutting through the rain-soaked darkness. Nothing visible, just endless trees and mist. We need to keep moving, I insisted, turning away from the disturbing structure. Vincent is still out here somewhere. We continued our journey, now moving directly toward the coordinates of the hollow according to GPS. The forest seemed to be allowing our approach now, the undergrowth thinning, the path straightening. It was almost as if, having shown us its message, it was now inviting us to our destination. The rain slackened to a gentle patter, then stopped altogether, though mist continued to swirl among the trees. Our flashlight beams created eerie halos in the moisture-laden air, visibility limited to perhaps 20 feet in any direction. After another half hour of tense hiking, we began to recognize landmarks. The distinctive rock formation to our left had been visible from the rise overlooking the hollow. We were close. "Weapons ready," I murmured, checking that my shotgun was easily accessible. "But don't fire unless absolutely necessary. Sound carries in this forest." We crept forward, moving as quietly as our sodden gear allowed. As we approached the rise, I motioned for Ryan and Mark to drop to a crouch. We crawled the final few yards, positioning ourselves at the edge to survey the hollow below. What we saw defied comprehension. The hollow was transformed. The ancient pines surrounding it now bore the deep gouges we had witnessed days earlier, but far more numerous, covering the trunks from ground level to beyond the reach of our flashlights. The forest floor had been cleared of underbrush in a perfect circle, the exposed earth disturbed as if by tremendous activity. In the center stood Vincent. He was alive, standing upright, though his posture was unnatural, arms hanging limp at his sides, head tilted slightly back, staring upward into the canopy. He made no movement, showed no awareness of the rain that had soaked his hospital gown or the mud coating his bare feet. And behind him, partially concealed by mist and shadow, stood the entity. It was tall, at least 8 feet, perhaps more, with a body so thin it appeared almost two-dimensional when viewed from certain angles. Its limbs were disproportionately long, the arms hanging nearly to the ground, ending in elongated fingers tipped with what looked like dense, dark claws. Its head sat atop a neck too long and flexible to be human, cocked at an angle that suggested curiosity or assessment. I couldn't make out facial features through the mist and darkness, but I sensed it was watching us, knew we were there despite our attempts at stealth. "My God," Mark whispered, his voice barely audible. As if in response to his voice, the entity's head turned slightly, orienting in our direction. Vincent remained motionless, seemingly unaware of either our presence or the creature standing mere feet behind him. "What's the play?" Ryan asked, rifle trained on the figure but finger carefully outside the trigger guard. I assessed our options, none of them good. We were witnessing something unprecedented, direct contact between a human and whatever this entity was. Vincent showed no signs of distress or fear. Was he in some kind of trance? Under control? Or had he come here willingly, seeking this encounter? We wait, I decided. See what happens. If Vincent is in immediate danger, we intervene. Otherwise, we observe. Minutes passed in tense silence. Rain dripped from the canopy above, creating a gentle percussion that only heightened the surreal quality of the scene. Vincent continued his unnatural stillness, while the entity maintained its position behind him. Then, without warning, Vincent spoke. His voice carried clearly through the night air, though he didn't appear to be addressing us. "They're here to watch," he said, his tone flat, emotionless, as you knew they would be. The entity made no sound in response, but Vincent continued as if hearing replies. "Yes, they're afraid, but curious, like you were, when you first found us." I exchanged alarmed glances with Ryan and Mark. Was Vincent communicating with the entity? Acting as some kind of translator? "It wants to know why we came back," Vincent said, still staring upward. "I told it you came for me. But that's not the whole truth, is it?" A chill ran through me as I realized Vincent was now addressing us directly. "You came because you need to understand," he continued. "Because what you saw doesn't fit your version of reality. Because it haunts you knowing something exists beyond your comprehension." I stood slowly, revealing my position. If Vincent knew we were here, concealment served no purpose. "Vincent," I called, keeping my voice steady. "Are you okay? Are you hurt?" Vincent's head lowered gradually until he was looking directly at me. His eyes reflected our flashlight beams strangely like those of an animal caught in headlights. "I'm more than okay," he replied, a faint smile touching his lips. "I'm transcending, becoming something new. It's showing me things, teacher to student." The entity behind him shifted slightly, its impossible limbs moving with fluid grace despite their awkward proportions. It made no aggressive move, simply observing our interaction. "What happened to Brandon?" I asked, taking a cautious step down the slope toward the hollow. Vincent's smile faltered. Brandon couldn't hear it properly. His mind rejected what it was trying to share. His body failed under the strain of new knowledge. "It killed him," Ryan stated flatly, still crouched with his rifle at the ready. "No more than a surgeon kills when a patient rejects a transplant," Vincent countered. "It tried to connect. Brandon fought. The connection broke him." I took another step forward. "Vincent, you need medical attention. You're not thinking clearly. Let us take you back." Vincent laughed, a sound so unexpected and incongruous it froze me in place. "Back to what? Artificial lights and processed food? Meaningless jobs and relationships? I've seen beyond that now. It's shown me the truth about our place in the world." The entity moved then, taking a single gliding step closer to Vincent. Its head lowered, bringing it nearer to Vincent's height, though still towering above him. The movement should have been threatening, yet somehow conveyed an almost protective quality. "What is it?" Mark asked, his voice filled with equal parts fear and wonder. Vincent cocked his head, as if listening to something we couldn't hear. After a moment, he spoke again. "It has lived in these woods for longer than you could comprehend. It watched the first humans enter this forest. It watched others come and go. It observed, learned, evolved. Is it alien?" Ryan ventured. Vincent shook his head. "Not in the way you mean. Not from another planet. It's from here. Always been here. Just adjacent to our reality. Watching through a membrane between worlds that grows thinner in certain places. Like here." As if to emphasize his words, the mist around the entity swirled more vigorously, momentarily revealing more of its form. Its skin, if that was the right word, appeared neither fully solid nor liquid, shifting with subtle patterns that hurt my eyes to focus on. "It's reaching out," Vincent continued, "trying to communicate, to teach, to share knowledge beyond what humans have discovered alone." "By killing people?" I challenged. "It doesn't understand our fragility," Vincent replied. "It's learning, adjusting. Brandon was a miscalculation. It didn't mean to break him." I took another step forward, now at the edge of the hollow proper. The entity's attention seemed to fix on me, though I still couldn't make out anything I would call eyes or a face in its elongated head. "And what about you, Vincent?" I asked softly. "Are you a better calculation?" His smile returned, wider now. "I'm suitable, compatible. My mind stretches instead of breaking. It's shown me things no human has ever seen. Knowledge no university could teach." "What kind of knowledge?" I pressed, taking another careful step. Vincent's expression grew distant, almost rapturous. "The true nature of reality, the layers beyond what we perceive, the connections between all living things, the memories stored in the very rocks and soil beneath our feet." The entity shifted again, one impossibly long arm extending slightly toward Vincent. I tensed, ready to raise my shotgun, but the movement appeared gentle, almost tender. "It wants to share with you too," Vincent said suddenly, his gaze intense. "All of you. It senses your potential, especially you," he added, looking directly at me. "Me?" I stopped my advance, a chill running through me despite the warmth of my rain gear. Vincent nodded. "It's been watching you since you first entered its territory. It sees something in you, a capacity to understand, to adapt, to transcend." The offer hung in the air between us, tempting and terrifying in equal measure. What knowledge might such a being possess? What truths about existence might it reveal? For a moment I felt a pull toward the center of the hollow, toward Vincent and the entity behind him. Then Mark's voice cut through my thoughts, sharp and alarmed. "Josh, look at his eyes." I focused more carefully on Vincent's face. In the beam of my flashlight, I could now see that his eyes had changed. The pupils had expanded until almost no iris remained, and within those black pools, something moved, patterns similar to those I had glimpsed on the entity's skin, swirling and shifting in hypnotic complexity. "It's already inside him," Ryan whispered. The realization broke whatever momentary spell had been cast over me. Vincent was not communicating with the entity. He was being controlled by it, used as a mouthpiece, a lure to draw us in. "Vincent," I said firmly, taking a deliberate step backward, "we're leaving now. You need to come with us." His expression hardened. "You still don't understand. I'm not a prisoner. I'm a student, an apprentice. The first of many once others learn what it can teach." "Others?" Mark asked. Vincent's gaze shifted to him. "Why do you think it arranged for Brandon's body to be found? Why it allowed you to escape and tell your story? It's recruiting, calling those whose minds might be compatible." A terrible understanding dawned on me. The missing body, the cleared evidence, our inexplicable ability to find our way out when the forest had seemed determined to confuse us. It had all been deliberate. We hadn't escaped. We had been released to spread the word, to pique curiosity, to draw others back. "We need to go," I said to Ryan and Mark, backing further up the slope. "Now." Vincent's face contorted with sudden anger. "You would reject such a gift? The opportunity to evolve beyond human limitations?" The entity behind him straightened to its full height, its form seeming to expand as the mist swirled more violently around it. The gouges on the surrounding trees began to seep a dark, viscous substance that caught the light of our flashlights in oily rainbows. "Last chance, Vincent," I called. "Come with us now, or we're leaving without you." For a brief moment, something like doubt flickered across Vincent's face, a momentary return of his true self, perhaps fighting against whatever influence controlled him. His mouth opened as if to speak, but no words emerged. Then his expression smoothed once more into that unnatural smile. "Go then. Tell others what you've seen. Some will fear, but some will come seeking. The curious, the dissatisfied, those who sense there must be more to existence than what they've been taught." The entity moved with sudden, startling speed, its elongated limbs carrying it from behind Vincent to the edge of the hollow in a single flowing motion. It stopped perhaps 30 feet from us, its head tilted in that same curious angle. Ryan raised his rifle instinctively, and Mark's revolver came up as well. "Don't," I warned them. "Just back away slowly. It's not stopping us from leaving." We retreated step by careful step, weapons ready but not aiming directly at the entity. It made no move to pursue, simply watching our withdrawal with what felt like analytical interest. Vincent remained in the center of the hollow, still smiling his unsettling smile. "We'll meet again," he called as we reached the top of the rise, "when you're ready to learn." We backed away until trees obscured our view of the hollow, then turned and moved more quickly through the forest. None of us spoke, focusing entirely on putting distance between ourselves and what we had witnessed. To my surprise, our return journey proved remarkably straightforward. The forest that had seemed so maze-like on our entry now offered clear paths back toward the fire road. No obstacles blocked our way, no dense undergrowth forced detours. Even the rain had stopped, the clouds parting to reveal a night sky brilliant with stars. It was letting us go, just as Vincent had said, releasing us to tell our story, to spread word of its existence. We reached Ryan's Jeep without incident and piled in, soaked and exhausted. Ryan started the engine but made no move to drive, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. "What the hell do we do now?" he asked finally, his voice barely audible over the idling engine. I had no answer. We had failed to rescue Vincent, if rescue was even the right concept for what had happened to him. We had confirmed the existence of something beyond rational explanation, something intelligent and potentially dangerous. But what could we possibly do with that knowledge? We tell the truth, I decided finally. As much of it as we can, without sounding completely insane. We warn people to stay out of that section of forest. And if they don't listen? Mark asked from the back seat. If Vincent was right and some people will be drawn to it specifically because of the danger? I had no answer for that. The entity had recognized something in humanity. Curiosity, perhaps, or the eternal search for meaning beyond the mundane. It had found a way to call to that aspect of our nature, to use it as a lure. "We drive," I said eventually. "We get out of here, get some rest, and figure out the rest tomorrow." Ryan nodded, putting the Jeep in gear. As we pulled away from the parking area, I looked back at the wall of trees marking the forest's edge. For just a moment, I thought I saw a tall, thin figure standing at the tree line, one impossibly long arm raised as if in farewell. Then it was gone, and there was only darkness beyond the reach of our headlights. 1 month has passed since our failed attempt to rescue Vincent. The official search for him continues sporadically, though most have given up hope of finding him alive. The prevailing theory is that he wandered into the forest in a state of delirium and succumbed to exposure or wild animal attack. Brandon Ellis's body was never recovered despite multiple extensive searches. I've been placed on extended administrative leave pending psychological evaluation. Ryan and Mark fare no better. Ryan has requested a transfer to another district, while Mark has submitted his resignation entirely, citing personal reasons. We've spoken little about what we witnessed in that hollow. The official report we filed mentioned finding Vincent in an altered mental state, communicating with an unidentified presence in the forest. Deliberately vague, carefully worded to avoid outright lies while obscuring the full, bizarre truth. Even so, we've become objects of sidelong glances and whispered conversations at the ranger station. The Forest Service has officially closed that section of the San Juan National Forest, citing environmental concerns and unstable ground conditions. Warning signs have been posted at all access points, though I doubt they'll deter everyone. Some people are drawn to forbidden places precisely because they are forbidden. I've moved out of my cabin near the ranger station, unable to sleep with the forest so close. My new apartment in town offers some psychological distance, though my dreams remain haunted by elongated limbs and swirling patterns that hurt to look upon. Today I received a letter. No return address, the handwriting unfamiliar yet somehow recognizable. Inside, a single sheet of paper contained just a few lines. The hollow waits, knowledge expands, others have come, others have stayed, the membrane thins. When you're ready to learn, it will welcome you back. Below these cryptic sentences, a crude drawing, the same repeating patterns we saw carved into the branches of that strange structure in the forest. And beneath that, a signature, Vincent. I should report this. Turn the letter over to the authorities as potential evidence in a missing person case. Instead, I find myself staring at those patterns, trying to decipher meaning from their alien geometry. Sometimes when my focus blurs just right, I almost think I can see something moving within them. Something pulling at me from behind a thin membrane of reality. 3 hikers have gone missing in the San Juan National Forest in the past month, despite the closure. All experienced outdoors people, all last seen heading toward the forbidden section. Search parties found no trace, though one reported hearing voices that didn't sound quite human, echoing through the trees at dusk. I've started researching similar incidents in other forests around the world. The patterns are there if you know what to look for. Unexplained disappearances, witnesses reporting encounters with impossibly tall, thin entities, strange structures of branches, and personal items found in remote clearings. Native legends from every continent speak of liminal spaces where the boundary between worlds grows thin, where entities from adjacent realities can reach through. What happened to us in that forest wasn't unique. It was just one manifestation of something that has been occurring throughout human history, contact between our world and whatever exists alongside it, separated by a membrane that occasionally grows permeable. I dream of the hollow almost nightly now. In these dreams, Vincent stands at its center, surrounded by others, the missing hikers perhaps, and others I don't recognize. Behind them all looms the entity, its form more defined in my dreaming mind than it ever was in reality. They beckon to me, offering knowledge, transformation, transcendence. Some nights I almost go to them. Ryan called yesterday, his voice tight with controlled panic. I saw it in town, he said without preamble, standing outside my apartment building, just watching my window. Nobody else seemed to notice it. Did it do anything? I asked, my mouth dry with sudden fear. No, just watched. Then it was gone between one blink and the next. He paused, breathing heavily. It's not confined to the forest, Josh. It can reach us anywhere. I've started seeing things too, tall, thin shapes at the periphery of my vision, gone when I turn to look directly. Patterns in ordinary objects that momentarily shift into those same carved symbols from the hollow. Brief moments when the world seems to warp slightly, the membrane between realities stretching thin enough to glimpse what lies beyond. Mark hasn't answered his phone in 3 days. His neighbor reported seeing him walking toward the edge of town late Tuesday night, carrying nothing but wearing hiking boots, in the direction of the forest. I should be terrified. I should be running as far from Colorado as possible. Instead, I find myself drawn back toward that hollow, toward the entity that waits there, toward the knowledge Vincent described so rapturously. What truths might exist beyond the limited perception of human senses? What understanding might transcend our biological constraints? If the entity truly offers evolution rather than destruction, is that something to flee from or embrace? I find myself thinking of human history, how we've consistently feared the unknown, demonized the different, rejected new paradigms until forced to accept them. Could this be the next step in our development as a species? Contact with an intelligence so different from our own that it shatters our conceptual frameworks and rebuilds them into something greater? Or is that exactly what it wants me to think? A mimetic infection, a manipulative lure designed to draw prey willingly into its grasp? I don't know anymore. The boundary between reality and nightmare has grown as thin as the membrane Vincent described. Sometimes I wake unable to remember who or what I am, my identity dissolving into larger patterns of existence before resolving back into human form. I've written this account as a record, a warning, a confession. Perhaps someone will find it after I'm gone and understand what happened to us in those woods. Perhaps they'll recognize the signs in themselves if they ever encounter that hollow and what waits within it, because I've made my decision. Tonight, I return to the forest. Not to rescue Vincent. I understand now that he doesn't need rescuing. Not to confront the entity. Confrontation implies opposition, and I no longer feel opposed to what it offers. I go to learn, to see what lies beyond the boundary I first glimpsed when my flashlight cut through the pine dark silence, and I caught a glimpse of something that shouldn't have been out there at that hour. If you're reading this and feel drawn to follow, to seek out that hollow and what waits within it, ask yourself one question. Are you prepared to become something other than human? Because once that boundary is crossed, I suspect there is no crossing back. The hollow waits, knowledge expands, the membrane thins, and I am ready to learn.